Hello, my friend. Tonight we're waking in England in the 870s, at an hour when the sky's still almost black, and the first pale suggestion of morning lies somewhere beyond a line of wet trees. For a moment, you do not move. You're lying beneath a coarse wool covering, listening. The fire has nearly died. A faint red glow survives among the ashes in the central hearth, and the air inside the house carries the familiar mixture of wood smoke, damp wool, earth, animals, and yesterday's cooking. Somewhere close to your feet, someone shifts in sleep. Outside, a cow gives a low, impatient sound. And beyond all of that lies another thought. The Danes, not necessarily outside your door, probably not even within a day's walk, but somewhere. That is enough. Before you settle deeper into this cold Anglo-Saxon morning, you might subscribe to the channel if these slow journeys into ordinary history help you relax. And if you are still awake enough to type, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. There is something rather comforting about imagining people scattered across the modern world, quietly visiting this much older one together. Now the embers crack softly. Morning is coming. You're somewhere in the kingdom of Wessex, in southern England, during one of the most anxious decades in Anglo-Saxon history. There is no England in quite the modern sense. There are English kingdoms. Wessex lies in the south and southwest. Mercia occupies much of the Midlands, though its power is being brutally tested. Northumbria lies farther north. East Anglia has already suffered catastrophe. Borders shift. Rulers compete. Loyalties change. And the political map that looks so conveniently coloured in a modern history book is considerably messier when you actually have to live inside it. You certainly do not wake thinking, what an interesting period of state formation. You are wondering whether there is enough dry wood. History is inconsiderate like that. The enormous events remembered by later generations usually arrive in ordinary lives disguised as practical inconveniences. A king dies, and you wonder whether taxes or military obligations will change. An army crosses a river 50 miles away, and suddenly travellers bring frightening stories to the village. A monastery is attacked, and somewhere else a farmer wonders whether the silver he owes will now be demanded sooner. During the 870s, those distant disturbances are becoming difficult to ignore. Large Scandinavian forces have been operating in England for years. Later chroniclers call one of them the Great Heathen Army, although historians still debate exactly what sort of force that phrase describes. Was it a single enormous invading army? Probably not in the simple cinematic sense. It seems more likely to have been a changing coalition of Scandinavian war bands, reinforced at different times, dividing and reuniting as circumstances demanded. Its precise numbers remain uncertain. Medieval writers rarely provide the sort of neat military statistics modern readers would love to possess. Still, the consequences are perfectly real. Northumbria has been invaded. East Anglia has fallen under Scandinavian pressure. Mercia is struggling. Kings have been defeated, displaced, or killed. Settlements have paid tribute. Land has changed hands. And Wessex waits. You push aside the wool covering. Cold immediately finds you. There are no glazed windows sealing your household away from winter air. No thermostat waits patiently on a wall. No cheerful little digital number assures you that the room is comfortable. The room is not comfortable. Comfort is largely a matter of comparison. The house protects you from wind and rain. There is a roof, there are walls, there is a hearth. Therefore, by the standards of the century, congratulations, things are going reasonably well. Your feet meet the floor, depending on the household. That surface may be beaten earth, perhaps scattered with plant material or rushes. Archaeology gives us foundations, post holes, hearths, fragments of pottery, animal bones, tools, and countless small clues. But these soft materials of daily existence usually disappear. That creates one of the quiet frustrations of reconstructing your life. The things you touch most often are often the things least likely to survive. Wood rots, cloth decays, Leather vanishes, food is eaten, voices leave nothing behind. So historians rebuild your morning from fragments. A spindle whorl here, a charred grain there, an iron knife corroded in the soil, the stain of a vanished timber post. History occasionally resembles trying to understand someone's entire household after finding 3 buttons, half a spoon, and a suspicious patch of dirt. Yet those fragments tell us quite a lot. Your world is overwhelmingly rural. Most people live from agriculture, directly or indirectly. The rhythm of the year matters more than any clock. Sunrise, weather, livestock, planting, harvesting, religious observance, and royal demands organize time, and war interrupts all of them. A household like yours cannot simply abandon its fields because armies are moving somewhere beyond the horizon. Grain still has to be grown. Animals still need tending. Fences still break with almost insulting regularity. If you are a free man with obligations to a lord or king, military service may also intrude into that routine. The Anglo-Saxon military levy is commonly described by the later term fyrd. Although exactly how military obligations operated at different moments remains debated. Service depends on status, landholding, local organisation, royal authority, and circumstances. For you, the important point is simpler. Someone may arrive and tell you that men are needed. Then the ordinary morning ends. Perhaps this is why rumours matter so much. You cannot check a map showing Viking positions. You cannot receive an alert. News moves at the speed of human beings, horses, boats, and frightened conversation. A traveller arrives. A priest has heard something. A merchant repeats what he was told at another settlement. Someone's cousin saw armed men. Someone else's cousin insists there were hundreds. By evening there are thousands. Human beings have apparently required no internet whatsoever to exaggerate alarming news. Still, some rumours are true. In the year 871, Wessex faces a particularly intense sequence of fighting. King Ethelred rules, with his younger brother Alfred beside him. Battles are fought at places remembered as Reading, Ashdown, Basing, Merton, and elsewhere. The details are difficult. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle provides an essential narrative, but it was compiled within a West Saxon political world and cannot simply be treated as a neutral modern report. Later writers add detail, sometimes valuable, sometimes difficult to verify. Even Alfred's famous victory at Ashdown comes wrapped in storytelling. Later tradition presents the young prince acting decisively while his brother remains occupied with religious observance before battle. Perhaps something like that happened. Perhaps the story was polished because it said something flattering about Alfred. Either way, people die, armies continue moving, and Wessex does not suddenly become safe. Then King Ethelred dies. Alfred becomes king. You would not yet call him Alfred the Great. A title belongs to later memory. To you, he's simply Alfred, a relatively young ruler inheriting a kingdom under extraordinary pressure. He's probably in his early 20s. Imagine that for a moment, at an age when a modern person might still be deciding what furniture belongs in a first apartment. Alfred is expected to preserve a kingdom from armies that have already broken others, and his first years are hardly an uninterrupted sequence of glorious victories. There are defeats, there are negotiations, there are payments, there are uneasy pauses. Wessex survives partly through fighting and partly through political accommodation. The image of Alfred as the lone heroic saviour belongs more comfortably to legend than to the complicated reality of the decade. From your village, however, royal strategy feels distant. What reaches you is consequence. A mounted messenger, a demand for provisions, a stranger seeking shelter, a rumour that an army has wintered somewhere unsettlingly close. Perhaps refugees appear, perhaps they do not. Perhaps your community goes months without seeing a Scandinavian warrior at all. That is worth remembering. Living during an age of invasion does not mean fighting happens outside your house every Tuesday. Most days remain stubbornly ordinary. You wake. You work. You eat. You mend things. You worry about weather. Children play. Dogs bark. People argue about boundaries. Someone borrows something and mysteriously forgets to return it. Life continues because it has to. Yet the possibility of violence sits behind the ordinary routine like distant thunder. You step toward the doorway. Someone has stirred the hearth now, coaxing flame from the surviving embers. Smoke curls upward. Not always as efficiently as you might prefer, your eyes sting slightly. Outside, the morning has become grey. Mist hangs low across fields, divided into working landscapes that generations of hands have shaped. Beyond them are patches of woodland, rough pasture, streams, tracks, and settlements connected by roots far older than Alfred. A bird calls, another answers. For a few seconds, nothing about the scene suggests that kingdoms are collapsing. You breathe the cold air. This is Alfred's England before anyone knows how Alfred's story ends. There is no guarantee that Wessex survives. No guarantee that the political entity later called England emerges in anything like its familiar form. The future is invisible. That may be the most important thing to understand about standing here. You know Alfred as the Great. They do not. You know that his descendants will rule an expanding kingdom. They do not. You know that chroniclers, scholars, novelists, filmmakers, and generations of schoolchildren will look backward and see this decade as a turning point. The person beside you is mostly concerned about breakfast. And now, as the settlement wakes around you and the first proper smoke begins rising from neighbouring roofs, you turn back toward the warmth. Because before kings, battles, laws, saints, markets, and armies can make much sense, you need to understand the small timber world from which you face them. The doorway closes behind you. The hearth glows brighter, and your Anglo-Saxon household begins another uncertain day. You remain near the hearth for a while, letting the returning warmth creep slowly into your fingers. Now that daylight is beginning to enter through the doorway and whatever small openings the building possesses, you can properly examine the place that keeps you alive. Calling it a house is perfectly accurate. Calling it comfortable requires some historical generosity. Your home is built primarily from materials gathered relatively close to where you live. Timber forms the structural frame. Walls might use planks, woven wattle covered with daub, or other locally available techniques. The precise construction varies with region, wealth, available resources, and the purpose of the building. Archaeologists sometimes have to reconstruct these structures from remarkably modest traces. Post holes, wall trenches, fragments of daub, dark stains in soil where wood once stood. The magnificent Anglo-Saxon palace of your imagination occasionally begins, archaeologically speaking, as several lines of suspicious dirt. Fortunately, experimental archaeology has helped researchers understand how such buildings may have functioned. Timber structures can be surprisingly effective when properly built. They are not simply miserable huts waiting to collapse during the first ambitious rainstorm. The roof rises steeply above you, probably covered with thatch or another organic material depending on local resources. It keeps most of the weather outside, which is an achievement you appreciate every time rain begins. Rain, of course, is not rare, neither is damp. Keeping the roof maintained is therefore an ongoing responsibility rather than something you casually schedule for next summer. Inside, the hearth dominates your existence. Fire means warmth. Fire means cooked food. Fire means light. Fire helps dry wet clothing. Fire transforms grain and raw ingredients into meals and makes long winter evenings tolerable. It is also smoky, dangerous, demanding, and constantly hungry. You feed it wood. Again and again. And again, the romantic medieval hearth loses a little charm when you realise someone has to gather every piece of fuel. The exact way smoke escaped Anglo-Saxon buildings remains a subject of reconstruction and debate. Roof openings, doors, gaps in construction, and natural ventilation probably played roles depending on the building. What you should not imagine is a neat modern chimney quietly carrying everything away. Some smoke remains with you. It catches in the throat. It settles into timber. It perfumes clothing with the unmistakable fragrance of "I live beside an indoor fire." You probably stop noticing much of it. Your eyes adjust to dimness as well. Artificial illumination after sunset is limited. Rushlights, lamps, candles, and firelight can provide illumination, but their availability depends on household resources. beeswax candles are valuable, and hardly something every ordinary family burns extravagantly while discussing the weather. Daylight is free. You use it. That makes the seasonal rhythm of life deeply physical. Summer gives long working hours. Winter closes around the household early. Along the walls you find the possessions that define your domestic world. There may be benches, wooden chests, stools, containers, baskets, textile equipment, cooking vessels, tools, perhaps a table or board arrangement. A wealthier household naturally owns more and better objects, while poorer people make do with fewer possessions, repairs, substitutions, and inherited items. Yet even prosperous households would look startlingly sparse to modern eyes. You do not have cupboards overflowing with objects purchased because they were discounted. Most things require materials, labour, skill, and time. A wooden vessel begins with a tree. A wool garment begins with sheep. An iron tool represents mining, smelting, smithing, fuel, transport, and expertise. Objects matter. You repair them. An iron knife may be among the most useful possessions you own. Knives appear constantly in Anglo-Saxon archaeological contexts because they serve everyday purposes for men and women alike. Cutting food, preparing materials, working around the household. A knife is less an exotic weapon than an ordinary tool. You might carry one suspended from a belt. Please try not to lose it. There is no convenient shop around the corner selling a replacement in 12 attractive colours. Wood is everywhere in your household, even though archaeology preserves it inconsistently. Bowls, buckets, furniture, handles, boxes, utensils, structural timbers and countless mundane objects may all depend on woodworking. Pottery is present too, though ceramic traditions vary across Anglo-Saxon England. Metal objects attract modern attention because they survive better and can look impressive in museum cases. Your lived environment, however, contains an enormous amount of material that will simply disappear into the soil. Then there are textiles. These represent staggering quantities of labour. Wool is enormously important. Sheep provide the raw material, but fleece does not politely transform itself into a warm tunic. It must be prepared. Fibres must be spun. Thread must be woven. Cloth may be dyed. Pieces must be cut and sewn. Garments must then be repaired repeatedly because nobody sensible throws away a perfectly usable tunic merely because the elbow looks tired. Linen is also used, made from flax through its own laborious chain of processing. Your clothing depends on status and resources, but a basic wardrobe might include a linen or woolen undergarment, a wool tunic or dress, cloaks, belts, leggings or hose in appropriate contexts, and leather footwear. Bright colour is entirely possible. This is important because modern depictions have spent years dressing early medieval people in 50 shades of mud. Natural dyes can produce reds, yellows, blues, greens, and other tones, though the quality, intensity, and cost vary. Some colours and fabrics signal greater wealth. Your world is earthy. It is not necessarily beige. Jewellery and dress fittings can communicate identity and status. Brooches, pins, buckles, beads, rings, and other objects appear in archaeological evidence, although styles change across centuries and regions. By Alfred's period, Christian burial practices and changing fashions mean that the rich furnished graves familiar from earlier Anglo-Saxon archaeology are less common, complicating our evidence. Even death has inconveniently changed the archaeological record. Around you, other people are moving now. Privacy is limited, very limited. Modern domestic life gives extraordinary importance to separate rooms, bedroom, bathroom, children's room, guest room, perhaps an office where someone attends a meeting while secretly eating toast. Your household may organise space very differently. Buildings can have internal divisions, and larger estates contain multiple specialised structures, but ordinary life often brings people physically close together. You work near others. You eat near others. You sleep near others. You hear them snore. There is no historical evidence that Anglo-Saxon snoring was more dignified than modern snoring. so we may safely assume knights occasionally test Christian patience. Sleeping arrangements depend heavily on wealth. A prosperous person may have a raised bed or substantial sleeping furniture with mattresses, blankets, pillows, and textiles. Others sleep on simpler bedding, perhaps using straw, plant material, wool, skins, blankets, or combinations available to the household. Precise reconstruction is difficult because bedding rarely survives. What matters is insulation. Cold rises through neither romance nor historical atmosphere. It simply makes you miserable. You place material between your body and the floor or sleeping surface. Wool coverings trap warmth. Warmth sharing sleeping spaces also helps, and winter nights are long. Outside, darkness may last for many hours while wind presses against the building. The fire sinks lower. People settle close together. Sounds become strangely distinct. Breathing, rustling straw, the shifting of animals, rain against thatch, perhaps a dog moving near the hearth. Animals deserve attention because the boundary between human and animal space is not always what a modern suburban household expects. Livestock may occupy adjacent buildings or sheltered spaces depending on settlement layout and circumstances. Chickens wander where chickens consider appropriate, which is usually everywhere. Dogs serve practical roles as well as companionship. Cats are present in Anglo-Saxon England too, useful around stored food where rodents would otherwise hold a nightly banquet. Your relationship with animals is intensely practical. A cow is not merely picturesque scenery. It represents milk, breeding, value, manure, labour in some contexts, and potentially meat or hides. Sheep provide wool. Pigs convert woodland resources and scraps into valuable food. Horses can represent transport, status, and military usefulness. Animals are wealth that breathes. This means losing one can be a genuine household disaster, so can losing stored food. Your house therefore contains or stands close to storage facilities. Grain, dried or preserved foods, tools, textiles, and valuable supplies need protection from damp, insects, rodents, thieves, and fire. Fire is particularly frightening. Your building is made from combustible materials. Your roof may be thatched. Your central source of heat is an open flame. This combination would not impress a modern insurance company. You learn caution early. Children learn it too. Childhood in your household does not mean complete freedom from responsibility until adulthood suddenly arrives. Children participate gradually in useful work according to age and ability. They watch animals, carry things, gather fuel, assist with food preparation, learn textile work, accompany adults, and absorb skills by observing them constantly. Formal education is available to only a minority, especially within ecclesiastical settings and elite society. Most knowledge reaches you through people. You learn how dough should feel because someone shows you. You learn when weather threatens crops because older people recognize the signs. You learn where animals can graze, which plants are useful, how to mend an object, how much grain remains, who owes whom a favour, and which neighbouring family has been arguing about a boundary since approximately the creation of the world. Memory is infrastructure. Family is infrastructure too. The household is not merely an emotional unit. It is productive and economic. Survival depends on coordinated labour. Exactly who belongs within it may vary. Parents, children, relatives, servants, dependents, enslaved people, workers, and visitors can all form part of larger domestic arrangements, especially on wealthier estates. And there is always work waiting. A garment needs mending, water needs carrying, fuel needs gathering, an animal needs feeding, food needs preparing. Nothing in the house performs labour automatically. You glance toward the doorway again. The settlement outside is fully waking. Smoke now rises into the cool morning from several buildings. Voices carry across the damp air somewhere. Wood strikes wood. A dog begins barking at something that probably does not deserve the enthusiasm. Inside, the warmth has finally reached your hands. Your home is smoky, crowded, dim, and relentlessly demanding. But it is also shelter. It holds your food, your clothing, your tools, your family, your stories, your memories, and the small collection of objects accumulated through years of labour. When armies move through kingdoms, this is what people are actually afraid of losing. Not an abstract political map. This, the roof above you, the fire before you, the people beginning their morning beside you. And speaking of morning, someone is already preparing food near the hearth. A vessel is moved. Grain waits nearby. Your stomach notices immediately. Kings may be fighting for Wessex. But breakfast remains wonderfully indifferent to geopolitics. The smell reaches you before the food does. Warm grain, smoke, something faintly sour from yesterday's bread. Perhaps the richer scent of dairy if the household has enough to spare. After the cold beginning to the morning, even a plain meal feels reassuring. You settle close to the hearth while breakfast takes shape. Do not expect a neat plate with eggs arranged beside toasted bread and a cheerful cup of coffee. Coffee is many centuries away from becoming part of English mornings. Tea, at least in the familiar imported sense, is equally absent. Your nervous system will simply have to face the Viking Age without caffeine. Instead, one of the foundations of your diet is grain. Barley is important, so are wheat, rye, and oats. Though their prevalence varies with region, soil, climate, status, and period. Archaeological remains of charred grains, storage features, grinding stones, and other evidence reveal just how thoroughly cereal cultivation supports everyday existence. Grain becomes bread. It becomes porridge or pottage. It helps produce ale. It can be stored, transported, taxed, traded, and stolen. A failed grain harvest is therefore not merely disappointing, it is frightening. Your breakfast may begin with some form of porridge made from cereal grain, perhaps enriched when circumstances allow with milk, butter, herbs, fruit, or other available ingredients. There is no single standardized Anglo-Saxon breakfast menu followed obediently across Wessex. Indeed, historians cannot always tell precisely when particular foods were eaten during the day. The modern expectation of breakfast, lunch, and dinner at fixed hours should be handled cautiously. Meal patterns vary with labour, season, household status, religious observance, and local custom. What matters is that you need calories, a great many of them. Soon you will be walking, lifting, carrying, digging, cutting, tending animals, repairing things, and generally discovering why nobody in the 9th century needs a fitness subscription. Bread is central. Depending on resources, it can be made from wheat or other grains, sometimes from mixtures. Higher quality wheat bread may carry associations with greater status. While coarser breads are common among ordinary households, the grain has already demanded enormous labour before becoming dough. It was planted, protected, harvested, threshed, winnowed, stored, ground. Only then can someone bake with it. Hand grinding is repetitive, tiring work. Quern stones turn grain into meal or flour, leaving behind the kind of physical evidence archaeologists can identify centuries later. You would probably find nothing remarkable about this. You have heard grinding since childhood. The sound belongs to domestic life. Bread might be baked in different ways depending on available facilities, including ovens, hearth arrangements, or heated surfaces. Archaeological evidence for ovens and cooking installations varies, and reconstruction requires caution. Your bread is unlikely to resemble a perfectly uniform modern supermarket loaf. It may be dense, irregular, dark or pale depending on grain and processing, and sometimes gritty if milling introduces tiny mineral particles. Your dentist would like a word. Unfortunately, dentistry is also having a rather quiet century. Beside grain, dairy can be enormously useful. Cattle, sheep, and goats may provide milk depending on local husbandry. Fresh milk does not keep indefinitely, so turning it into butter or cheese makes practical sense. Cheese transforms a perishable liquid into something more durable and transportable. Butter provides concentrated fat. Both can make an otherwise plain diet far more satisfying. You might eat curds, soft cheeses, or harder preserved products. although reconstructing exact varieties is difficult. Medieval food rarely leaves behind a convenient label saying, "Mild farmhouse cheese, best before Thursday." Then there are eggs. Chickens are kept, and eggs can supplement the diet. Again, availability changes seasonally. Your hens are living creatures governed by biology, not supermarket logistics. Vegetables and legumes matter too. Peas and beans provide useful nutrition. Cabbage-like plants, onions, leeks, garlic, and various leafy greens or cultivated herbs may appear depending on place and season. Gardens close to settlements can supply foods that leave a much fainter archaeological signature than grain. This has occasionally distorted popular pictures of medieval eating. Because animal bones survive well, it is tempting to imagine tables constantly collapsing beneath mountains of roasted meat. Ordinary life is less theatrical. Meat is certainly eaten. Pigs, cattle, sheep, goats, poultry, and wild animals can contribute to diets. But how frequently you eat meat depends greatly on wealth, access, season, estate organization, and local circumstances. A wealthy household can consume considerably more animal protein than a poor farming family, and animals are often worth more alive. A cow produces milk, a sheep produces wool, a hen produces eggs. Eating the productive animal immediately is rather like solving a temporary financial problem by eating your bank account. Pigs are especially useful because they can be driven into woodland to feed on acorns and beech mast. Woodland pasture therefore has economic importance. Rights to use woods, grazing areas, rivers, and meadows can matter enormously to communities. When meat is available, preservation becomes essential. Without refrigeration, you rely on techniques such as salting, drying, or smoking, depending on the food and household resources. Salt is valuable because it preserves as well as seasons. Fish provides another important source of food. Rivers, streams, coastal waters, and the sea support fishing. Freshwater species vary by location, while coastal communities have access to marine resources. Shellfish may also be gathered where geography permits. Religious practice influences food choices as well. Christian fasting traditions restrict meat on certain days and seasons. Though exactly how rigorously ordinary people follow ecclesiastical expectations can vary. Church calendars are not abstract theology. They can reach directly into your cooking pot. You lift your bowl. There is probably no fork waiting beside it. Knives and spoons are familiar. People also use fingers when appropriate. Wooden utensils are common but survive poorly. While metal examples attract more archaeological attention, your vessel may be wooden, ceramic, or occasionally metal depending on purpose and status. You eat slowly. The food is warm. That matters. It may accompany meals. This does not mean everyone wanders around permanently drunk because water is supposedly poisonous. The popular claim that medieval people never drank water because it was universally unsafe is far too simplistic. People absolutely drink water. They understand that some sources are better than others. Springs, wells, streams, and other supplies provide drinking water, though contamination is certainly a risk. Ale is nevertheless deeply embedded in the food economy. It is made primarily from malted grain and can vary considerably in strength and quality. Brewing is a household skill as well as a larger-scale activity in some settings. Ale provides calories as well as liquid. It does not arrive in identical bottles with carefully printed alcohol percentages. A batch can differ from the previous one. The process requires grain, water, fuel, vessels, knowledge, and time. Honey can sweeten food and drink. But refined sugar is not sitting casually in a bowl on your table. Fruit supplies sweetness too. Apples, berries, plums, sloes, and other fruits may be cultivated or gathered depending on locality. Nuts such as hazelnuts can be valuable seasonal foods. Wild resources matter. The landscape around you is not divided neatly into farm and nature. It is a working environment full of resources. People gather berries. They collect nuts. They cut wood. They graze animals. They gather plants for food, Flavouring, dyes, medicines, bedding, and countless other purposes, knowledge of season is crucial. You know when particular foods appear. You know which plants are useful. You know what can be stored. You know what disappears when frost comes. And storage determines survival. After harvest, grain must last. So must preserved meat, cheese, dried foods, and other supplies. Every mouse eating your grain is therefore committing what feels like a deeply personal crime. Rodent control matters. So does keeping stores dry. Mold, insects, damp, theft, and accidental loss all threaten reserves. Then comes the hungry part of the year. Late winter and early spring can be particularly difficult when stored food is diminishing, but new crops are not ready. Modern historians sometimes use the idea of a seasonal hunger gap to describe this recurring vulnerability in pre-industrial societies. Not everyone starves each spring, but the margin can become uncomfortable. A household entering winter with full stores feels different from one whose harvest was poor. Weather therefore sits at your table even when the sky outside is clear. Too much rain during harvest can ruin grain. Too little rain can reduce yields. An early frost can damage crops. Livestock disease can destroy wealth. Human illness can remove essential labour precisely when it is needed most. Then warfare adds another layer. An army does not carry a magical warehouse behind it. Warriors require food. Horses require fodder. Campaigning forces may seize supplies, demand tribute, purchase provisions, or consume resources from surrounding regions. Even if no battle reaches your village, war can still empty barns. That possibility changes the way you look at the grain stored nearby. It is not simply food. It is time. Every measure represents labour already spent and meals not yet eaten. You scrape the last of the warm mixture from your bowl. Around you, other members of the household are finishing as well. There is little reason to linger indefinitely. The sun is climbing. Animals are waiting. Fields are waiting. And depending on the season, dozens of jobs are already competing for attention. You rise, pulling your woolen clothing more securely around yourself. The meal has given you warmth. Soon work will take it back, outside. Damp soil waits beneath the pale sky. And somewhere beyond the settlement lie the strips, pastures, meadows, and fields upon which almost everything in your life ultimately depends. Breakfast is over. Now you have to earn tomorrow's. The ground gives slightly beneath your shoes as you leave the cluster of buildings behind. Moisture darkens the soil, grad brushes against your legs. Ahead, the working landscape spreads outward in irregular shades of green and brown, interrupted by hedges, woodland, rough pasture, tracks, streams, and cultivated ground. This is where most of your security comes from. It is also where most of your exhaustion comes from. Farming in the England of the 870s is not a solitary farmer sitting proudly on an isolated property. Landholding and agricultural organisation are complicated, and arrangements vary greatly across regions. Estates can contain land worked directly for a lord alongside holdings used by dependent or free households. Communities share access to certain resources while maintaining recognised rights and obligations. The neat open field systems associated with later medieval England should not simply be projected backward unchanged into Alfred's lifetime. Agricultural landscapes are evolving, and historians continue debating when particular field arrangements developed. You would not care what future scholars call your system. You know which ground you're expected to work. That is sufficient. Depending on your status, some of your labour supports your own household and some may be owed elsewhere. Rent can be paid in goods, food renders may be demanded, labour services may be expected. A lord's estate requires workers, and royal households need enormous quantities of provisions as kings and their followers move through the kingdom. Coins exist, certainly, but your economy is not one in which every obligation is settled by reaching into a purse. A payment might consist of grain, livestock, ale, honey, cheese, or other produce. A king cannot eat a coin, at least not usefully. So land matters because land produces things. You begin with one of the fundamental tasks preparing soil. The plough is among the most important technologies in your world. Different forms exist, and archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests variation in equipment and practice. Some lighter soils can be worked with simpler implements. While heavier soils benefit from stronger ploughing systems, oxen are immensely valuable here. They are slow. They are powerful. They do not care about your schedule. A team represents substantial wealth and cooperation. Not every household necessarily owns enough animals to supply an entire plough team independently. So neighbours and associated households may cooperate. That means agriculture is social. If your ox is injured, someone else may need to help. If another household lacks labour, perhaps you contribute. Favours accumulate. Obligations accumulate. Resentments occasionally accumulate faster. You guide the work across the soil. It is physical. Mud clings to footwear. Hands become rough. Shoulders ache. The animal moves at the speed the animal considers appropriate. Behind the plough comes another task, and then another. Seed must be sown. Fields must be watched. Weeds must be controlled. Boundaries and fences require attention. Drainage can matter. Animals must be kept from crops unless you wish to discover how efficiently a hungry pig can reorganize your agricultural plans. The farming year is a chain. Break one link at the wrong time and later work becomes harder. Spring brings planting and livestock concerns. Summer demands maintenance and haymaking. Harvest concentrates enormous labour into a narrow window. Autumn involves further sowing in some systems, processing crops, managing animals, and preparing for winter. Winter is quieter agriculturally, but quieter does not mean idle. Tools need repair. Animals need feeding. Fuel needs collecting. Grain needs processing. Buildings need maintaining. Textiles continue. Food continues. Life stubbornly refuses to provide a proper weekend. Hay is particularly important. Animals cannot simply graze lush summer pasture through an English winter. Meadowland that produces hay is valuable because stored fodder keeps livestock alive when grass growth declines. You cut it, dry it, gather it, store it. Rain during haymaking is unwelcome. Rain during harvest is worse. Imagine watching dark clouds gather over grain that represents months of work. There is no weather application to consult. You read the sky. You feel the wind. You observe animals, clouds, moisture, and accumulated local experience. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes England reminds you that it is England. Rain arrives anyway. Harvest brings almost everyone who can contribute into the work. Grain must be cut, gathered, transported, dried appropriately, threshed, winnowed, and stored. Tools such as sickles appear in archaeological evidence. Their iron blades representing valuable craftsmanship. You bend, cut, gather, stand, move, repeat, again, again, again. The romantic golden harvest field becomes considerably less romantic around the 1000th repetition. Children help according to their abilities. Women participate in agricultural labour as well as domestic production. Men, servants, dependents, and others work wherever household and estate organisation require them. Rigid modern images of medieval gender roles can obscure how much practical necessity shapes labour. Someone must do the work. The crop is not impressed by ideology. Once harvested, grain still requires processing. Threshing separates grain from stalk. Winnowing separates useful grain from lighter chaff using air movement. Storage then becomes its own battle against damp and pests. The straw is useful too. Almost nothing should be wasted. It can contribute to bedding, roofing, animal care, and other purposes depending on need and local practice. Your animals require just as much attention as your crops. Cattle provide dairy products, hides, meat and traction. Sheep provide wool and meat. Pigs are valuable meat animals and can exploit woodland pasture efficiently. Goats appear too, although their importance varies regionally. Then there are horses. A horse is useful for riding, transport, communication and status, and increasingly important in elite and military contexts. But for much heavy agricultural traction in this period, oxen remain central. Livestock ownership also reveals inequality. A household with several cattle occupies a different economic position from one barely maintaining a few animals. And animals reproduce, fall sick, wander away, get stolen, injure themselves, and occasionally die for reasons you cannot explain. You possess practical veterinary knowledge, but nothing resembling modern veterinary medicine. Experience guides treatment. Traditional remedies circulate. Some probably help, some probably do nothing. Some may make the animal wonder what terrible decision brought it into human society. You work with uncertainty constantly. The same applies to crop yields. Historians debate the productivity of early medieval agriculture because evidence is incomplete and local conditions vary enormously. Seed-to-yield ratios are difficult to establish precisely. And later, medieval figures cannot automatically be applied backward, but nobody doubts that your margins can be narrow. You need seed grain for the next planting. This is crucial. Not all grain in storage is available for eating. Some represents next year's crop. Eating it during a desperate winter solves today's hunger by creating tomorrow's disaster. So the household performs quiet arithmetic. How many mouths? How much grain? How much seed? How many animals can be fed? How much must be rendered to a lord? What can be traded? What if winter lasts longer? What if someone becomes ill? What if soldiers arrive? There is no spreadsheet. There is memory, measurement, experience, and worry. Royal demands sit somewhere within those calculations. Anglo-Saxon kingship depends on networks of estates and obligations. Kings and their households travel, consuming food supplied from royal lands and renders. Administrative arrangements are complex, and our best evidence is uneven. But food production clearly supports political power. This means the barley under your fingernails is connected, however indirectly, to Alfred's ability to rule. Kings require warriors. Warriors require food. Food requires farmers. The grand machinery of resistance to Scandinavian armies eventually reaches down into mud. You straighten your back. For a moment, you look toward the horizon. No army appears. Good. That does not mean war is irrelevant. When Scandinavian forces move through a region, they need supplies too. Armies can devastate agricultural communities through seizure, destruction, occupation, or disruption. Even rumors can cause problems. Animals may be moved, goods hidden, people flee temporarily. Work is interrupted. A field does not care why nobody harvested it. The grain simply falls. This is one reason warfare is so destructive even beyond battlefields. Then there are royal military obligations. If men are summoned for service during an important agricultural season, someone still has to perform their work at home. Later reforms associated with Alfred attempt to organize military service and fortified defenses more effectively, but those developments belong especially to the later crisis and reconstruction of his reign. For now, in the 870s, the kingdom is still learning painfully how difficult sustained defense can be. You return your attention to the immediate task. A fence needs repair along one edge of the working ground. Wooden boundaries matter because livestock possesses a remarkable ability to locate exactly the opening you hoped it would overlook. You replace material, push it into position, test it. Not elegant, effective. Nearby, another person calls to you. Perhaps a neighbour, perhaps a relative. You answer. This landscape depends on such voices. People borrow animals, share labour, exchange information, coordinate access to resources, and watch one another's behaviour with the intense interest produced by living in a small community. Everyone knows approximately how hard everyone else is working, or believes they do. By midday your hands are dirty. Your clothing carries the smell of soil and animals. There is more work ahead, yet the landscape around you is not merely a place of hardship. You know it intimately. You recognize individual trees. You know where the ground remains wet after rain. You know which pasture is best in a dry summer. You know where berries appear. You know the path to the stream without thinking. Generations before you have known many of the same places. The land contains memory, and somewhere among the fields, woodland paths, grazing animals, and drifting smoke, you begin moving back toward other people. because farming never truly separates you from your community. The fields feed the settlement, but the settlement provides the hands, skills, agreements, gossip, arguments, favours, and relationships that make those fields possible. Ahead, voices grow louder. Children are moving between buildings. A craftsman is already at work. Someone is calling after an escaped animal with language that is probably not preserved in any surviving manuscript. The village is fully awake, and you are walking straight back into it. The escaped animal turns out to be a pig. Of course it is. It trots between two buildings with the serene confidence of a creature that has discovered freedom and has no intention of discussing the matter. A child runs after it. An older man shouts instructions that are neither useful nor calm. Someone standing near a doorway begins laughing. For a few moments, Alfred, the Danes, royal succession, and the survival of Wessex can wait. The pig has become the political crisis of the morning. You help block its path. It stops, considers you with profound disappointment, and eventually allows itself to be redirected. Life in your settlement is full of such interruptions. The word village is convenient, but you should not automatically imagine the classic later medieval English village with neat cottages gathered around a stone church and open fields stretching beyond it. Settlement patterns in Anglo-Saxon England vary considerably. Some communities consist of scattered farmsteads. Others form more concentrated groups. Some settlements move or reorganize over generations. Larger royal, ecclesiastical, or aristocratic centres can include halls, workshops, churches, storage buildings, and specialised activity. Your home might belong to a modest cluster of households rather than anything resembling a modern village. Yet socially, the effect is similar. You rarely disappear into anonymity. People know you. More dangerously, they remember you. Your neighbours know your relatives, your livestock, your obligations, your strengths, and probably several embarrassing incidents from childhood that you would prefer to leave in the 8th century. Reputation matters because trust matters. There are few formal institutions available to manage the thousands of tiny exchanges that keep daily life functioning. You lend a tool. Someone helps repair a fence. You share access to animals or equipment. A neighbour watches livestock while another household handles urgent work. Food passes between people. Information passes even faster. Reciprocity is part of survival. That does not mean everyone lives in perfect communal harmony. Quite the opposite. Close cooperation creates endless opportunities for disagreement. Animals cross boundaries. Someone damages a fence. Someone fails to perform promised labour. Someone claims rights over meadow, woodland, or grazing. Someone owes payment. Someone insults someone else's family. And because you cannot simply move 300 miles away after an unpleasant neighbourhood disagreement, relationships must somehow continue. Law and custom help manage serious disputes, but much everyday tension is probably settled through negotiation, pressure from relatives, local authority, compensation, compromise, and the powerful desire not to spend the next 20 years glaring at the same person across a field. You pass a household where textile work is underway. The movement is familiar. Wool has to be transformed from fleece into usable fibre and then into thread. Spinning is so constant that spindle whorls are among the characteristic archaeological finds from early medieval settlements. A spindle whorl is small. The labour it represents is enormous. Hours become thread. Thread becomes cloth. Cloth becomes clothing, blankets, bags, hangings, and other essentials. Weaving may take place on different types of looms. The warp-weighted loom, familiar from earlier Anglo-Saxon contexts, uses hanging weights to keep warp threads under tension, while other loom technologies also develop and spread. Textile production requires skill. A badly woven piece of cloth wastes valuable material and time. Good work has value, so do the people who can perform it efficiently. Nearby woodworking leaves its own sounds. An axe strikes timber. Wood is the invisible skeleton of your civilization. Buildings depend on it. Carts depend on it. Buckets, bowls, handles, boxes, furniture, fences, tools, boats, and countless ordinary objects depend on it. A skilled carpenter or woodworker understands different species and properties of timber. Some woods bend, some split cleanly, some resist wear, some make better handles, some make better structural pieces. You do not need a scientific textbook to know this. Generations of practical experience already do. Farther along, you may encounter a smith. Now the sound changes, metal against metal. The smith occupies a special place because iron is indispensable. Knives, axes, sickles, shears, nails and fittings were used, weapons, horse equipment, tools for other crafts. Iron production begins long before the smith shapes the final object. Ore must be obtained, smelted, and processed. Charcoal or other carefully prepared fuel is required for high-temperature work, which itself means woodland resources and specialized labor. A finished iron tool therefore concentrates many layers of expertise. You value it accordingly. Broken iron can be reforged or recycled. Metal is too useful to abandon casually. Archaeologists sometimes find surprisingly small quantities of metal on settlements precisely because people were good at recovering valuable material. Your rubbish would disappoint future excavators. You keep recycling everything interesting. Children move through this working landscape almost continuously. Their world is not sharply separated from adult work. A small child plays. Certainly, archaeology has produced objects interpreted as toys, including miniature items, though interpretation can be difficult. Games and storytelling surely occupy young minds just as they do in every human society. But children also learn by participating. A girl may watch spinning long before she performs it expertly. A boy may follow adults tending animals. These divisions are not necessarily absolute, and practical household need matters enormously. Children carry water, gather small pieces of fuel, scare birds from crops, watch younger siblings, help with animals, learn which adults are safe, which are impatient, and which can be persuaded to provide an extra piece of food. Childhood is real. It is simply more integrated into household production than many modern children experience. You hear laughter from somewhere behind you. That matters too. Historical reconstruction can accidentally turn ordinary people into exhausted machines who spend every waking moment farming until they collapse. They do not. People talk, joke, sing, play games, tell stories, celebrate feast days, attend gatherings, visit relatives, drink together, flirt, complain, probably complain quite a lot. Human nature did not wait for modern plumbing before developing sarcasm. Hospitality has practical and social importance. A traveller may need food and shelter. Elite halls make hospitality into a political performance, with rulers and lords distributing food, drink, gifts, and protection at the humbler level, receiving relatives, neighbours, messengers, clergy, or travellers reinforces relationships. But strangers also attract attention. A newcomer walking into your settlement is noticed immediately. Where has he come from? What does he want? What news does he carry? News is one of the most valuable things a traveller brings. There is no newspaper, no regular postal system serving ordinary households, no morning bulletin. Information travels through human networks. Merchants know what happened elsewhere. Clergy carry ecclesiastical news. Royal messengers carry commands. Travellers repeat rumours. Warriors return with stories. Someone who visited a market several days away suddenly becomes extremely interesting. You listen. Perhaps the Danes have moved. Perhaps they have made an agreement with a king. Perhaps a battle has occurred. Perhaps the rumour is already obsolete. The speed of communication means you often live inside uncertainty. By the time news reaches you, events may have changed. This makes local knowledge especially important. You know what is happening here. Who is ill? Whose cow calved? Which household lost grain to damp? Which marriage is being discussed? Which boundary is disputed? Who owes labour? Who has relatives elsewhere? Marriage itself connects communities. It is not merely private romance, though affection can certainly exist. Marriage joins households, property interests, kin groups, and obligations. Anglo-Saxon law codes and wills reveal that women can possess property and that marriage arrangements involve significant economic considerations. The precise lived reality varies enormously by status. Elite marriages may reshape politics. A farming marriage may reorganize land, labor, inheritance, and family alliances on a smaller scale. Kinship surrounds you. Your relatives provide support. They can also provide trouble. If a dispute becomes serious, family involvement matters. Responsibility and compensation can extend through networks of kin. This gives social life a weight unfamiliar to highly individualistic modern societies. Your actions are yours, but they are rarely only yours. You continue through the settlement. Cooking smells drift from one building. Someone is repairing leather near another. Leatherworking supplies shoes, belts, bags, straps, harness components, sheaths, and other useful objects. Hides from livestock are valuable raw material, processed through methods that can produce memorable smells. The past, unfortunately, does not always smell like beeswax and wood smoke. Some crafts are pungent. Waste exists too. There are no municipal garbage trucks arriving politely before breakfast. Ash, broken pottery, animal remains, dung, food waste, and damaged objects must all be handled. Some materials are reused. Organic waste can contribute to manure. Other rubbish ends up in pits, ditches, middens, or scattered deposits that future archaeologists will examine with extraordinary enthusiasm. One person's rubbish is another person's doctoral thesis. Water shapes settlement location as well. You need reliable access for drinking, cooking, washing, livestock, and craft activity. Wells may serve some settlements. Springs and streams serve others. Laundry is laborious. So is personal washing. The popular image of medieval people as universally filthy should be resisted. People wash themselves, their hands, faces, clothing, and household items. Though standards and facilities differ profoundly from modern expectations, bathing practices vary. You do not have a private tiled bathroom with unlimited hot water. Heating water means fuel. Carrying water means effort. Therefore, every bucket possesses a cost measured partly in someone's back. Still, cleanliness matters socially and practically. So does appearance. Hair is combed. Beards are groomed. Clothing is maintained. Archaeologists find combs made from bone or antler, sometimes beautifully constructed. Even while kingdoms collapse, somebody's still trying to get a knot out of their hair. You reach the edge of the settlement again and look back. Smoke rises gently above roofs. People cross between buildings. Animals wander through spaces shared with humans. The place is small enough that nearly every movement belongs to someone you recognize. It can feel restrictive. It can also feel safe. When winter comes, these people help one another. When harvest comes, these people work beside you. When danger comes, warning passes quickly. And when someone behaves badly, everyone will know before sunset. Your world is intimate because it has to be. Yet intimacy does not mean equality. Some households possess more land. Some command more labor. Some people give orders while others obey them. Some are free to negotiate obligations. Others have frighteningly little freedom at all. As you watch a servant carrying a load toward a larger household, the comfortable idea of one harmonious Anglo-Saxon community begins to fracture, because everyone here knows their place, and some places are far harder to escape than others. The load disappears through the doorway of the larger household, and for a moment you remain where you are, watching, from a distance. Everyone in the settlement can look much the same. Wool clothing, muddy footwear, weathered hands, smoke clinging to hair and cloth. Move closer, however, and distinctions become difficult to miss. The quality of a cloak, a decorated buckle, the number of animals standing behind a fence, the amount of land a household controls, the people who perform labor and the people who command it. Your world is intensely conscious of rank. At the top stands the king. In Wessex during much of the 870s, that means Alfred. Though his authority is not the centralized bureaucratic power of a modern state, he rules through personal relationships, landholding, assemblies, royal officials, religious institutions, military obligations, law, gift-giving, and networks of powerful men. A king who cannot maintain those relationships becomes a king with serious problems. Below him are leading nobles. You may hear the term ealdorman used for particularly important royal officials who exercise authority across substantial territories. These are not simply wealthy neighbours with unusually impressive cloaks. They can command military forces, witness royal charters, administer regions, and participate directly in the political life of the kingdom. Then there are thegns. The exact meaning and social position associated with the term changes over time, so it should not be treated as a perfectly fixed title. Broadly, a thegn is a man of elevated status connected to service, land, wealth, and lordship. A successful thegn may possess an estate containing multiple households. He may maintain armed followers. He may attend the king. His hall becomes a centre of authority. And when Alfred needs men, food, horses, information, or loyalty, such local elites become extremely important. You probably know who your local lord is. Even if you rarely see the king, you may see his power reflected through these people. Then comes a broad and complicated world of ordinary free people. The Old English word ceorl is often translated as freeman or peasant, but neither modern English term captures every nuance. A ceorl can hold land and possess recognised legal rights. He can marry, own property, participate in economic life, and in certain circumstances improve his family's position. But freedom does not mean equality. A modest free farmer is separated from a great noble by an enormous gulf of wealth and influence. Still, that free status matters profoundly. Law assigns values to people partly according to rank. One of the clearest expressions of this is the Vergild, literally the man price, a compensation value associated with a person's social status. If someone is killed, compensation can play a role in resolving the resulting conflict rather than allowing vengeance to continue indefinitely. The amount varies according to rank and legal tradition. A noble life is valued more highly in legal terms than that of an ordinary freeman. To modern ears, this can sound chillingly mathematical. To your society, it is partly a mechanism for turning bloodshed into negotiable compensation, not humane by modern standards, but potentially preferable to two families attempting to murder one another for the next 3 generations. Your rank affects more than compensation. It influences the value of your oath, your obligations, your access to powerful patrons, the kind of punishment you might face, the respect you command in an assembly. Your clothing and possessions may advertise some of these differences, though there is no convenient badge pinned to everyone explaining their precise legal category. People know. Reputation, ancestry, land, service, and relationships make status visible, and status can change. A family can rise, a family can fall, land can be gained or lost, royal favour can transform fortunes. War can do the same much faster. An elite man killed in battle leaves property, dependents, heirs, and political relationships behind. A lord accused of disloyalty can lose royal favour. A successful warrior may receive gifts or land. Social mobility exists. It's simply nothing like the modern idea that everyone begins with broadly equal legal possibilities. Birth matters enormously. So does freedom itself, because beneath the free population are enslaved people. Slavery is not a marginal oddity in Anglo-Saxon England. It is woven into society. Old English sources use terms such as theow for an enslaved person, and law codes distinguish slaves from free people in unmistakable ways. How large the enslaved population is during Alfred's lifetime cannot be calculated precisely. Later evidence, including the Domesday Survey centuries afterward, show substantial numbers of enslaved people still present in England. Though regional patterns differ, in your century, slavery is certainly familiar. People can enter slavery through warfare, punishment, debt, birth, or other circumstances. Captives are particularly important. The conflicts between Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had long produced prisoners even before Scandinavian armies intensified warfare. Viking raiding and warfare are also deeply connected with slave-taking and trading. Human beings are valuable commodities. There's no comfortable way around that fact. An enslaved person may work in agriculture, tend animals, cook, carry water, produce textiles, perform household labor, or carry out specialized work depending on skills and circumstances. Their exact living conditions vary. An enslaved worker in one household might live close to the owner's family and perform domestic tasks. Another might endure brutal agricultural labor with very little autonomy. Christian teaching complicates but does not eliminate slavery. The Church can encourage manumission, the freeing of enslaved people, particularly as an act of charity or spiritual merit. Clergy discuss obligations towards slaves. Some enslaved people may eventually gain freedom. Yet Christian institutions themselves can own unfree labourers. Moral discomfort and economic practice coexist. Humans are talented at arranging such contradictions. You notice an unfree worker carrying another bundle. He may wear clothing little different from that of a poor freeman. That is important. Slavery is a legal and social condition, not necessarily something you can identify instantly by appearance. His lack of freedom lies in what he cannot choose, where he lives, whom he serves, what labour he performs, whether he can leave. His body exists within another person's economic power to a degree that yours may not. If you're free, that distinction is precious. You may still owe labour. You may still pay rent. You may still answer to a lord. You may still be summoned for military duty. Freedom in the 9th century contains an impressive quantity of obligation, but you belong to a legal category that recognizes rights unavailable to the enslaved. Land sits at the center of much of this hierarchy. Some land is associated with inherited customary arrangements. Other property can be granted through written charters, especially among elites and religious institutions. Historians often distinguish forms of landholding, using terms such as bookland and folkland. Though the precise interpretation of these categories has generated substantial scholarly debate, you do not need to join that debate tonight. You need to understand one simple fact. Control land and you control production. Control production and you can support followers. Support followers and you possess political weight. A lord's wealth is not merely a chest full of silver. It is fields, cattle, woodland, meadow, rights, people, food renders, labour. The hall you occasionally enter makes this hierarchy physical. The lord sits prominently. Retainers gather around him. Food and drink are distributed. Gifts may be exchanged. Decisions are made. Stories reinforce reputation. A successful lord is expected to provide protection and reward loyalty. Followers, in return, owe service. This reciprocal ideal runs deeply through Anglo-Saxon elite culture. Old English poetry, though much of it survives in manuscripts copied later, repeatedly imagines the generous lord distributing treasure to faithful warriors. Gold matters, but the relationship matters more. A ring on a warrior's arm says something about who rewarded him. A weapon can carry social meaning beyond its practical use. A feast is political theatre. Even drinking together can reinforce hierarchy. You sit according to status. You receive according to status. Everyone watches. At the village level, differences are quieter but equally real. One household has more livestock. Another owns better equipment. One family can survive a poor harvest using reserves. Another must borrow. Debt creates dependence. Dependence can deepen. A bad sequence of years can pull a household downward. This is one of the hidden dangers of your agricultural world. Poverty is not merely possessing fewer things. It means having less protection against misfortune. If your only cow dies, the wealthy neighbour with 12 cattle experiences sympathy. You experience catastrophe. Kin can help. A lord may help. The church may provide charity. Neighbours may offer support. But every form of assistance can create obligations. You remember the favours. So does everyone else. Women occupy positions throughout this hierarchy as well. Elite women can control property, witness important transactions in some contexts, make religious donations, manage estates, and influence dynastic politics. Ordinary free women participate intensely in household production and may possess legal and economic interests recognized in surviving law. Enslaved women experience the same fundamental absence of freedom as enslaved men, often combined with vulnerabilities specific to their position. The details will deserve closer attention when you spend more time inside women's daily work. For now, you simply watch the settlement through the lens of rank. Suddenly the landscape looks different. That larger house is not merely larger. Those extra cattle are not merely animals. That decorated belt is not merely decoration. The servant carrying grain is not merely helping. Objects, buildings, labour and gestures all speak the quiet language of hierarchy. And above these local differences stands King, whose ability to command loyalty may determine whether the entire structure survives the decade. Yet Alfred's authority rests on more than swords and land. The Church supports ideas of legitimate kingship. Priests interpret suffering. Monasteries preserve learning. Saints offer protection. Oaths can carry sacred weight. The calendar itself is shaped by Christian observance. As the day's labour briefly slows, a distant sound reaches you. A bell, perhaps from a nearby church or religious community. People turn their heads almost automatically. The sound travels across fields, over roofs, and through the cool air. For you, heaven is not separated neatly from everyday life. It is woven directly into it. And so, with mud still on your shoes and the hierarchy of the settlement all around you, your attention shifts toward the sacred world that gives this difficult life another layer of meaning. The bell fades slowly across the fields, but its meaning remains. You do not live in a world where religion waits politely for one morning each week. Christianity surrounds the calendar, law, kingship, burial, food, storytelling, ideas of illness, and the way people understand good fortune and disaster. It shapes the words spoken over infants and the prayers whispered beside the dying. The church is part of the landscape, depending on where you live. Your nearest place of worship might be a modest timber church rather than the towering stone building that the word medieval encourages a modern imagination to produce. Important churches and monasteries can be much more substantial. Stone construction exists, especially at prestigious religious centres, but many local structures leave only faint archaeological traces. You approach one such sacred place. A cross may stand nearby. The church feels different from your house, but not completely separate from ordinary life. People gather here who also work beside you, trade with you, marry into your family, and argue over animals. The priest is a religious figure. He is also a neighbour. The quality of clerical education varies. Some priests possess substantial learning. Others may know enough Latin to perform required services without being great scholars. Latin dominates formal liturgy and learned Christian culture. You, however, probably speak Old English in everyday life. Naturally, you do not call it Old English. It is simply English. If a modern English speaker were dropped beside you and confidently announced that the language barrier should be manageable, the resulting conversation would be extremely educational and extremely brief. Regional dialects exist, and the West Saxon forms later associated with many surviving Old English manuscripts become especially important under Alfred and his successors. But spoken language is only one part of religious experience. You do not need to understand every Latin phrase to understand the rhythm. Standing, kneeling, crossing yourself, listening, watching, smelling smoke or incense where it is used, hearing chant, seeing sacred objects. Christianity is experienced through the body as well as through words. The church year gives structure to time. Christmas, Easter, saints' days, fasts, feasts, periods of preparation and celebration. The exact pattern of observance varies, and local communities may honour particular saints with special enthusiasm. Saints feel close. Their relics can be even closer. A relic might be a fragment associated with the body of a saint or an object connected to a holy person. To you, this is not merely a historical curiosity sealed behind museum glass. Relics possess sacred importance. They can attract pilgrims. They can establish the prestige of churches. People seek healing or protection through them. Oaths may be strengthened by sacred settings or objects. Powerful people donate land and wealth to religious institutions partly because spiritual consequences are taken seriously. A monastery can therefore become wealthy. It may control estates, receive food renders, employ workers, own livestock, possess precious metalwork and books, and, as Scandinavian raiders have already demonstrated, wealth stored in religious communities can attract unwanted attention. The famous attack on Lindisfarne occurred generations before the morning you're experiencing. But by Alfred's time, Scandinavian warfare has become far more than occasional coastal raiding. Religious communities have suffered. Some have been disrupted or abandoned. Others survive. The extent and character of monastic decline in different parts of 9th century England remains debated. Earlier historians sometimes painted an image of near-total cultural collapse under Viking attack. Modern scholarship is generally more cautious, or is destructive, but destruction is uneven. A monastery can decline for reasons besides Vikings. A religious community can survive invasion. Institutions adapt. The evidence refuses to behave as neatly as dramatic storytelling would prefer. Alfred himself will later complain about the decline of learning in England, especially knowledge of Latin. His educational programme becomes one of the defining features of his reign. Yet even Alfred's lament must be read carefully. A reforming king has reasons to emphasise how badly reform is needed. If you announce that everything's already excellent, your educational revival loses a little urgency. Still, there are genuine concerns about learning. Books are precious. Every manuscript requires prepared writing material, skilled scribes, ink, time, and expertise. A book is not casually purchased and forgotten beneath a bed. It represents enormous labour. Many manuscripts use parchment made from prepared animal skins. Producing enough pages for a substantial volume consumes significant resources before a scribe writes a single letter. You may never own a book. You may never read one. Literacy is concentrated among clergy and elites, though it is not confined absolutely to them. Christian teaching therefore reaches most people orally. Sermons, stories, prayers, images, ritual, memory. You know biblical narratives without possessing a Bible. You know saints through stories told repeatedly. You know what your community expects because you have watched it since childhood. And those expectations extend to death. Christian burial has transformed Anglo-Saxon funerary practice over the preceding centuries. Earlier pagan period graves sometimes contain weapons, jewellery, vessels, and other goods that modern archaeologists find enormously informative. By Alfred's age, Christian burial practices generally mean fewer grave goods. The dead are often buried in cemeteries associated with churches or Christian communities, though patterns vary. The body is treated according to religious expectations. Prayers matter. The soul matters. Where you're buried matters. People remember the dead through ritual and family memory. Yet older traditions have not simply vanished without trace. This is where reconstruction becomes fascinating and uncertain. By the 870s, Anglo-Saxon England has been Christian for generations. You should not imagine ordinary villagers secretly practicing an intact pre-Christian religion every evening after the priest goes home. Christianity is deeply established, but older cultural habits can survive inside a Christian society. Words, customs, stories, beliefs about places, protective practices, healing traditions, ideas concerning supernatural beings. The boundary between Christian and pagan survival is often difficult for historians to identify because later, church writers may condemn practices without explaining exactly what people were doing. A priest complaining about superstition tells us something existed. Unfortunately, he rarely provides the convenient ethnographic interview historians would like. You may believe in elves. Old English medical and religious texts preserve references suggesting that supernatural beings could be associated with illness or mysterious harm. You may fear malevolent spirits. You may know charms. Later surviving Old English medical collections combine herbal remedies, prayers, ritual actions and formulas that modern readers might separate into medicine, religion, and magic. You probably do not separate them so cleanly. If a person becomes sick, you want them better. You might use a plant known to help. You might say a prayer. You might seek a priest. You might follow a traditional procedure inherited from someone older. There is no requirement that only one explanation be considered. Some remedies contain ingredients modern science recognizes as pharmacologically active. Others seem symbolic. Some are baffling. And some later medieval medical recipes make you deeply grateful that your current problem is only a mild headache. Healing is uncertain because illness itself is mysterious. You understand injuries. You recognize fever. You know when someone cannot breathe properly. But microorganisms remain invisible. Disease can therefore be interpreted through environmental, bodily, spiritual, and supernatural frameworks. Christian teaching offers explanations for suffering without guaranteeing easy answers. Why does a child die? Why does a harvest fail? Why does an army defeat a Christian king? Perhaps sin matters. Perhaps divine judgment. Perhaps God is testing people. Perhaps human beings simply cannot understand divine purposes. These questions become especially sharp during invasion. Imagine hearing that churches have been attacked and religious communities destroyed. If saints protect holy places, why does this happen? Clergy must interpret catastrophe. Biblical history provides models. The people of Israel suffer defeat. Kings are punished. Communities endure trials. Disaster can become a call for repentance rather than proof that Christianity has failed. Alfred's later writings and reforms emerge from a world where political survival and spiritual health are closely connected. Good kingship has moral dimensions. Learning matters because wisdom matters. Law matters because order matters. A king does not merely defend land. Ideally, he defends a Christian people. You stand near the church as people gather. An older woman murmurs something quietly. A child fidgets. Someone smells strongly of sheep. Sacred atmosphere and ordinary humanity coexist perfectly. Perhaps a priest speaks about a saint. Perhaps prayers are offered for the king. Perhaps news of war enters the service. The Scandinavian enemies themselves are commonly understood as heathens because many Scandinavian warriors still follow pre-Christian religious traditions, although conversion, cultural contact, intermarriage, and political accommodation complicate the picture. Not every Scandinavian remains pagan forever. Some accept baptism. Some Christian rulers negotiate with pagan leaders. Religious identity matters deeply, but politics remains politics. A baptized enemy can still be inconvenient. A pagan ally can occasionally be useful. Human arrangements remain messier than theological categories. When you leave the church, the daylight seems brighter. A small cross may hang against someone's clothing. Another person carries an object believed to offer protection. Somewhere a mother repeats a prayer learned from her own mother. You walk back toward the settlement with the sound of worship fading behind you. Faith offers rhythm. It offers explanations. It offers hope that suffering belongs to a story larger than the frightening events of one decade. But then a rider appears along the track. At first, he's only movement between trees. Someone notices him. Conversation slows. The rider approaches quickly. Mud marks the horse. The man's clothing shows the signs of travel. You cannot hear his words yet. You do not need to. People are already gathering. Travellers bring news, and during these years, news arriving quickly from the east is rarely comforting. The rider reaches the settlement. Someone asks where he's come from. He answers. Then comes the word everyone has been waiting to hear and hoping not to hear. Danis. The sacred calm of the morning disappears. The word passes through the gathered people almost faster than the rider can explain it. Danes. Someone asks where. Someone else asks how many. A third person wants to know which road they're using. The rider answers as well as he can, but certainty is immediately in short supply. Perhaps armed men have been seen near another settlement. Perhaps travellers report movement along a river. Perhaps the news concerns a larger army operating many miles away. By the time one person's account has passed through 5 mouths, 20 warriors can become 200 without anyone deliberately lying. fear is an efficient storyteller. You listen carefully. In your world, the term used for Scandinavian enemies can vary. Old English sources speak of Danes, heathens, Northmen, and armies using several terms whose meanings shift according to context. The people threatening Wessex are not necessarily all from the territory of modern Denmark. Scandinavian warbands can include people from different regions and backgrounds. Their coalitions change. Leaders cooperate, separate, negotiate, and compete. To you, those distinctions may feel less urgent if armed strangers take your livestock. Their precise Scandinavian birthplace is not the first question that comes to mind. The crisis confronting Anglo-Saxon England has developed over decades. Earlier Scandinavian attacks were often associated with coastal raids, monasteries, and vulnerable settlements. But by the middle of the 9th century, the character of warfare is changing. Armies remain for longer periods. They winter in England. They seize strategic bases. They demand tribute. They intervene in kingdoms. They conquer territory. The force later remembered as the Great Heathen Army arrives in the middle of the 860s and begins a sequence of campaigns that transforms the political landscape. East Anglia initially encounters the army. Then Northumbria becomes a target. The Northumbrian kingdom is already troubled by internal rivalry when Scandinavian forces capture York. Kings fall. Political structures fracture. The army moves again. Mercia comes under pressure. East Anglia is conquered. Its king, Edmund, is killed and later remembered as a Christian martyr, though the famous details surrounding his death come largely from later traditions and cannot all be treated as straightforward contemporary reporting. What matters to you is simpler. Kingdoms that once seemed permanent are no longer permanent. That realization is terrifying. Wessex is next. In the year 870, Scandinavian forces move against the kingdom. Reading becomes an important base. Then comes fighting. Englefield. Reading. Ashdown. Basing. Mertul. Other encounters follow. The surviving written narrative makes the year sound like one long sequence of battles, and in political terms it is extraordinary. For ordinary people, however, warfare includes far more waiting than fighting. You wait for news, wait for men to return, wait to discover whether an army's approaching, wait to learn whether your lord will demand supplies, wait while someone insists that everything is fine. That person is rarely reassuring. If danger appears serious, your household must decide what can be moved. Livestock may be driven away from exposed areas if there is time. Portable valuables can be hidden. Food stores matter enormously. Tools matter. Clothing matters. But you cannot put your house into a bag. You cannot carry a field into the woods. Agricultural communities are vulnerable precisely because their wealth is rooted in place. A raiding force does not need to burn every building to damage you. Take the cattle. Take grain. Take horses. Interrupt planting. Prevent harvesting. Destroy stored fodder. The consequences continue long after the warriors leave. And then there is the danger of captivity. Scandinavian warfare participates in a wider slave economy. Captives can be taken, transported, exchanged, or sold. The threat is not unique to Vikings, since enslavement already exists within Anglo-Saxon society. But Scandinavian expansion connects English captives to broader trading networks. You therefore fear more than death. You fear being carried away. Imagine the psychological weight of that. Your identity depends heavily on place and kin. You know the fields, the stream, the church, the graves of relatives, the households around you. To be seized and transported across the sea means losing almost everything that makes your world intelligible. So when the rider says Danes, people begin thinking about children, about animals, about roads, about hiding places. Perhaps nothing happens. That possibility should remain with you. Not every rumour becomes an attack. Not every settlement experiences violence directly. Many people living through these wars may never see a major battle. History compresses years into paragraphs, creating the impression that warriors are constantly sprinting across the countryside. Real armies need rest. They need food. They negotiate. They establish camps. They winter. They divide. They move according to geography, politics, and opportunity. Rivers are especially useful. Scandinavian ships provide mobility. But the popular image of sleek longships appearing magically beside every inland village exaggerates what vessels can do in every landscape. Ships vary in design and purpose, and armies also depend extensively on movement over land. Horses become important. The Chronicle records Scandinavian armies acquiring horses on several occasions, allowing rapid movement. They may ride to campaign and dismount to fight rather than operating as cavalry in a later medieval sense. Speed becomes one of their great advantages. A force can appear where defenders do not expect it, then disappear before a larger response forms. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms struggle partly because military systems designed around temporary service and local obligations are poorly suited to enemies capable of sustained campaigning. Farmers cannot remain under arms forever. Remember the fields you worked earlier. They do not pause because you have joined the feared. If you spend months campaigning, somebody else must sow, harvest, tend livestock, and maintain the household. Military service competes directly with survival. The Scandinavian armies face logistical problems too, but they can exploit conquered territory, tribute, captured supplies, and strategic bases. Winter camps become especially significant. Traditionally, campaigning seasons are constrained by weather and food. An army that winters inside enemy territory changes the calculation. You cannot simply endure an attack and assume everyone sails away when autumn becomes unpleasant. The enemy may still be there in January. This is precisely what makes the later crisis of Alfred's reign so dangerous. But even in the 870s, Wessex is learning the lesson. After intense fighting in the year 871, Alfred becomes king following his brother's death. He continues fighting. The results are mixed. Later, heroic memory tends to shine brightest on victories. But Alfred's early kingship contains uncomfortable compromise. He makes peace with the Scandinavian army. Money may have played a role, although the precise arrangements are uncertain. To a modern viewer expecting a heroic king to shout something inspirational and charge into battle, negotiation may seem disappointing. To you, it might sound wonderful. Peace means planting. Peace means harvest. Peace means your cattle remain where you left them. A king's first responsibility is not to provide satisfying television. It is to keep his kingdom alive. The Scandinavian army eventually turns elsewhere. Mercia suffers heavily. Its king, Burgrud, is driven from power in the middle of the decade and goes into exile. A new ruler, Ceolwulf, takes power under circumstances described dismissively by the West Saxon Chronicle, which calls him essentially a foolish royal servant of the Danes. Modern historians are more cautious. The Chronicle has political reasons to diminish him. Ceolwulf may have possessed more genuine authority than Alfred's later West Saxon narrative wished to admit. Once again, history is being written by people with opinions. Then the Scandinavian forces divide. Some campaign in northern and eastern regions. Others eventually turn back toward Wessex. Leaders such as Guthrum emerge prominently. By the later 870s, the danger is becoming acute again. For your household, however, names matter less than proximity. The rider continues speaking. Perhaps the report concerns men collecting supplies. Perhaps a neighbouring estate has received orders. Perhaps local defenders are being assembled. People exchange looks. An older man begins discussing livestock. Someone suggests moving valuable objects. Another insists there is no need to panic. Nobody uses the word panic while behaving calmly. You look toward your house. Smoke still rises from the roof. Inside are grain, blankets, tools, clothing, and the small possessions you examined this morning. The pig has apparently forgotten its brief rebellion and is eating peacefully. Everything looks ordinary. That is what makes the threat unsettling. War does not always announce itself with horns and burning horizons. Sometimes it begins with a tired rider, a rumour, a hurried conversation, a decision to move the cattle before sunset. You help gather what needs gathering. Children sense the tension even when adults avoid explaining it. Dogs become excited because everyone else is moving quickly. Someone checks a spear, someone else packs food. The settlement changes rhythm, yet the feared warriors do not appear. Hours pass. The sky darkens slightly with cloud. Eventually you begin to understand that whatever danger exists, it is not immediately outside the settlement. Breathing becomes easier. For now, but the warning has done something important. It has reminded you how fragile ordinary life is, and somewhere beyond these fields, the young king responsible for protecting it faces the same uncertainty on a far larger scale. Alfred is not yet the calm, learned ruler remembered by later generations. He is a young man inheriting defeat, negotiation, illness, family expectations, and a kingdom that has watched its neighbours collapse. To understand why Wessex survives, you now have to leave the frightened village for a moment and look toward the man who has somehow become responsible for all of it. From your village, Alfred exists mostly as a name carried by other people. You do not see him every morning. You do not receive cheerful updates from the royal household explaining what the king is thinking. You know him through commands, coins, stories, military obligations, church prayers, officials, and whatever news reaches your community. And in the 870s, nobody yet knows that later generations will attach the word great to his name. Alfred is born in the middle of the 9th century into the royal house of Wessex, the youngest known son of King Ethelwulf. This matters immediately. He does not begin life as the obvious future king. Several older brothers stand ahead of him. His childhood therefore unfolds within a dynasty that already possesses considerable power, but also within a political culture where succession is not simply a matter of one fixed modern rule stating that the eldest son automatically receives everything. Anglo-Saxon kingship depends on royal ancestry, political acceptance, practical ability, and the support of powerful men. Alfred's family is formidable. His father Ethelwulf rules Wessex during years when Scandinavian raiding is becoming increasingly serious. Alfred's older brothers Ethelbold, Ethelbert, and Ethelred each become king before him, so Alfred grows up watching kingship at extremely close range. He also watches brothers die. That has a way of changing career expectations. Much of what you think you know about Alfred personally comes from an unusual source, a biography written by Asa, a Welsh cleric who later joins Alfred's circle. Asa's life of King Alfred gives intimate details that are rare for rulers of this period. It also creates problems. Asa admires Alfred. He writes within the king's environment. His work has purposes beyond satisfying future curiosity. Scholars have debated aspects of the text, including its manuscript history and interpretation. Although most accept it as fundamentally genuine and extraordinarily valuable, you should therefore listen to Asa much as you might listen to a very intelligent person describing his employer, carefully. One famous story concerns Alfred's childhood education. According to Asa, Alfred's mother shows her sons a beautifully decorated book of English poetry and promises it to whichever boy can learn it fastest. Young Alfred wins. It is a charming story. Perhaps it happened much as Asa describes. Perhaps details have been polished to present Alfred as naturally drawn toward learning. Either way, the theme becomes central to his later reputation. Alfred values books, but his formal education is apparently imperfect. Asa says he learns to read Latin relatively late, despite wishing for greater learning when young. This later becomes politically important because Alfred eventually promotes education and the translation of significant works into English. But that belongs mostly to the mature king. The Alfred you encounter in the 870s is first and foremost a warrior prince struggling to survive. He has already travelled surprisingly far. As a child, Alfred visits Rome. Asa says he is received by Pope Leo IV and symbolically invested in some way. Although older interpretations that the Pope somehow made the child a king are difficult to sustain, his father later travels to Rome as well, with Alfred accompanying him. Imagine the experience. You live in a landscape of timber halls, fields, woodland, and modest settlements. Then you see Rome. Ancient masonry, churches, relics, pilgrims, clergy from distant regions. the physical remains of an empire that still shapes Christian imagination. We cannot know precisely what Alfred remembers or how deeply the journey influences him, but it places him within a world much larger than Wessex. Then comes illness. Asser describes Alfred suffering repeatedly from a mysterious and painful condition. The exact diagnosis has fascinated modern writers. Some suggest Crohn's disease, others propose hemorrhoidal disease, another intestinal disorder, or different chronic conditions. None can be proven. Diagnosing a 9th century king from a medieval biography is, medically speaking, ambitious. What seems reasonably clear is that Alfred experiences recurrent physical suffering. Asser presents it as severe enough to affect him throughout much of his life. That changes the image of the heroic warrior king. Imagine commanding men while in pain, riding for hours while ill, sleeping in temporary quarters, eating whatever campaigning provides, meeting nobles while trying not to show weakness. The crown does not come with sick leave. Before becoming king, Alfred fights beside his brother Ethelred. The crisis of the year 871 throws them into repeated confrontation with Scandinavian armies. At Ashdown, the West Saxons win one of their most celebrated victories. Later tradition gives Alfred a dramatic role. According to Asser, the West Saxon armies divided into two forces, one under Ethelred and another under Alfred. The king remains at prayer while the Scandinavians prepare to attack, leaving Alfred in the awkward position of deciding whether to wait or begin. Alfred attacks. The story is almost suspiciously perfect. The devout king refuses to abandon worship. The courageous prince takes necessary action. Both brothers emerge with virtues intact. Perhaps the account preserves a real memory. Perhaps literary shaping makes the scene cleaner than reality. You can almost hear generations of historians politely clearing their throats. The victory at Ashdown does not end the war. Other battles go badly. Men die. The Scandinavian army remains dangerous. Then Ethelred dies. Whether his death results directly from wounds sustained in battle is uncertain. Sources do not allow a confident answer. Alfred becomes king. He is still young. His brother leaves sons, which means succession could theoretically become complicated. Yet Alfred takes the throne, apparently with sufficient political support to do so during a military emergency. Imagine receiving that responsibility. Northumbria has been shattered. East Anglia has fallen. Mercia is under pressure. Scandinavian armies operate inside England. Your own kingdom has suffered repeated fighting. Congratulations. You are king. Alfred's early response is not a sequence of miraculous victories. He fights again at Wilton and is defeated. Peace follows. The details are frustratingly obscure. The Chronicle says Alfred makes peace with the army. Later sources imply payments may have been involved. Whatever the arrangement, Wessex receives breathing space. This is where later legend can mislead you. A great ruler does not always look great while events are happening. Sometimes survival requires compromise. Sometimes you pay. Sometimes you retreat. Sometimes you wait while your enemies attack someone else. The Alfred of these years is learning, and he has much to learn. He must manage nobles whose loyalty matters. He must maintain royal estates. He must raise forces. He must negotiate. He must judge disputes. He must produce heirs. He must support the church. He must somehow persuade communities like yours that royal demands are worth obeying. Kingship is exhausting administration wrapped in expensive clothing. His personal household moves with him. Early medieval kings are itinerant. Rather than governing permanently from a single capital, Alfred travels among royal estates and important centres. Winchester is significant. So are other royal sites. But you should not imagine him sitting continuously in one palace office beneath a sign reading Government of Wessex. The king moves because resources are distributed across his lands. Royal households consume enormous amounts. Food renders from estates support them. Local elites host them. Justice and politics occur through presence. Where Alfred goes, government partly goes with him. His family matters too. Alfred marries Ealhswith, a Mercian noblewoman, in the late 860s. The marriage connects him to important Mercian aristocratic networks. She later becomes mother to several children who play major roles in the future of Wessex and England. Yet Ealhswith receives far less attention in surviving narrative sources than her husband. This imbalance is typical. The written record shines light selectively. A king's actions are recorded. The daily labour surrounding kingship often disappears. Even Alfred's image is partly constructed by what survives. Later generations remember him as lawgiver, scholar, military reformer, defender of Christianity and father of English political unity. Then folklore adds more. Most famously, the cakes. You may already know the story. Alfred, hiding from the Vikings, is supposedly sheltered by a peasant woman who asks him to watch cakes cooking near the fire. Distracted by his royal worries, he allows them to burn and receives a scolding. It is irresistible. It is also a much later story. The earliest surviving form appears centuries after Alfred, so if you are hoping to watch the king sadly staring at burned cakes in the 870s, history must disappoint you. He has more immediate problems. By the middle of the decade, Scandinavian forces have broken Mercian power. Then armies divide and redistribute themselves. Some Scandinavian leaders begin settling conquered lands. Others remain active. Guthrum becomes one of the most important figures confronting Wessex. The pressure begins building again. Alfred has survived his first years as king, but surviving is not winning. He has not yet reorganised Wessex into the defensive system associated with his later reign. He has not yet experienced the great crisis that will drive him into the marshes. He has not yet defeated Guthrum decisively. From your perspective, none of that exists. You simply hear that the king is gathering men again. Perhaps a local Thegan receives instructions. Perhaps horses are prepared. Perhaps someone in your household is expected to serve. The distant figure named Alfred suddenly becomes very immediate. A spear is taken from storage. Food is packed. A cloak is fastened. A man says goodbye to his family without knowing when he will return. The king may suffer from illness, political uncertainty, and the burden of command, but his decisions travel downward. Eventually they reach your doorway, and now someone you know is walking toward war. The man walking away from the settlement does not look like the warrior of later romantic paintings. There is no shining suit of plate armour, no enormous warhorse covered in heraldic cloth. No dramatic soundtrack follows him over the hill. He carries what equipment his status, resources, and obligations allow, along with food, clothing, and the uncomfortable knowledge that he may be gone longer than anyone expects. If you are the one called to serve, the transformation from farmer to fighting man can happen disturbingly quickly. The military system of Wessex rests upon obligations connected with land, lordship, royal authority, and local organisation. Historians use the term fyrd for Anglo-Saxon levies, but you should resist imagining a perfectly standardised national army with identical recruitment procedures in every decade. The evidence is more complicated. Some warriors are experienced members of aristocratic households. Others owe military service because of landholding arrangements. Local leaders gather men. Royal forces combine these groups when necessary. Later in Alfred's reign, military organisation becomes more systematic. But in the 870s, you are still living through the painful lessons that encourage those reforms. Your equipment reflects hierarchy. A wealthy warrior may possess a sword. That sounds ordinary until you consider the labour inside one. Good swords require skilled smithing and considerable resources. They can be valuable possessions, sometimes passed between generations or given as prestigious rewards. A poorer fighting man is more likely to rely primarily on a spear. The spear is practical. Its materials are comparatively economical. A wooden shaft carries an iron head. It can thrust. It can be thrown in some circumstances. And a line of men holding spears is far more dangerous than the weapon's simplicity suggests. Then comes the shield. Round shields are strongly associated with warfare in this period. Archaeological evidence includes metal bosses. While wood and other organic components usually decay, the central boss protects the hand. The wooden board provides coverage. Leather or other materials may reinforce parts of the construction depending on design. You hold the shield in front of you. Immediately, one romantic misunderstanding disappears. It is heavy enough to become tiring. Now imagine carrying it for hours. Add a spear, food, a cloak, perhaps additional equipment, then walk through mud. War is already becoming less cinematic. Helmets are desirable, but probably not universally available. Surviving Anglo-Saxon helmets are rare, and the magnificent examples displayed in museums come largely from earlier elite contexts. Mail armor exists and offers valuable protection, but it is expensive. An elite warrior may wear a mail shirt. An ordinary levy cannot be assumed to own one. Many men therefore go into danger protected mainly by shields, thick clothing, perhaps limited armor, and optimism. The sword at your neighbor's belt does not make him a knight. Knighthood in the later medieval sense belongs to a different social and military world. He is an Anglo-Saxon fighting man, and he walks. Armies depend enormously on feet. Scandinavian forces use ships and increasingly horses for strategic mobility, while West Saxons and troops also use horses in some circumstances, particularly elites and messengers, but much campaigning still means long movement across difficult ground. Roman roads remain useful in places, so do older tracks. River crossings matter. Bridges matter. Weather matters constantly. Rain transforms roads. Cold stiffens fingers. Wet clothing becomes miserable. Food disappears faster than expected. You sleep wherever the army stops, perhaps inside a settlement, perhaps in temporary shelter, perhaps under whatever protection you can arrange. The luxurious medieval campaign consists largely of trying to remain dry while several hundred other people also want the driest available place. Then comes hunger. An army must eat every day. This is one reason military movements affect civilians even when no fighting occurs nearby. A large force consumes grain, livestock, ale, cheese, fodder, and anything else that can sustain humans and animals. Royal forces may draw upon organised food renders and local support, but logistics are never simple. If supplies fail, discipline becomes harder. Hungry armed men are not ideal guests. You march under a local leader, perhaps a Then or Ealdorman whose authority connects your group to Alfred's wider army. Commands move downward. Information moves less reliably. You may not know where you're going until shortly before you arrive. You certainly do not receive a detailed strategic briefing. Rumour fills the gaps. The Danes are nearby. No, they have crossed the river. No, they are retreating. No, there are twice as many as expected. Someone claims to know because his cousin spoke with a messenger. Apparently cousins remain one of the great intelligence services of the 9th century. Eventually the mood changes. Scouts report movement. Men tighten straps. Conversation becomes quieter. This is where historical terminology becomes slippery. People often imagine Anglo-Saxon battle as two perfectly organised shield walls, pushing against one another until one collapses. Shield formations are certainly important. Literary sources describe dense bodies of warriors, and shields naturally work best when men support one another, but the precise mechanics of battle are debated. How tightly do warriors stand? How much missile exchange occurs before contact? How frequently do formations open? How long does close combat last? Our sources are not battlefield manuals. Later poetry can preserve cultural memories while also using literary conventions. Archaeology gives weapons and injuries but rarely choreography. So you stand without pretending to know exactly what the next 10 minutes will look like. You know only that the men beside you matter. That may be the heart of the formation. Courage is easier when everyone remains together. If men begin running, fear spreads. If a leader falls, morale can collapse. If one side loses cohesion, pursuit can turn defeat into catastrophe. You grip the spear. Your hand is damp. Across the ground are men you've been taught to call heathens. They are not supernatural. That almost makes things worse. They are tired humans carrying shields and spears much like yours. Many have campaigned for years. Some are experienced fighters. Some are probably frightened too. They have families somewhere. They complain about rain. They get hungry. Then someone gives an order. Noise rises. Shields strike. Voices shout. The calm world of the village disappears. Battle is confusion. Your field of vision narrows. You notice fragments. A shield edge. Mud. A spear point. Someone shouting beside your ear. The smell of sweat. The strange heaviness of your own breathing. PG-rated history can leave the exact injuries outside tonight's story. It is enough to know that edged weapons and spears are brutally effective, and that even survivable wounds carry serious risks. There are no antibiotics. A cut that looks manageable today may become dangerous later. Broken bones can permanently alter a person's life. Head injuries may never heal properly. A warrior who survives battle can still die days afterward. Archaeological skeletons occasionally preserve evidence of healed trauma, reminding you that some people live for years after injuries that sound astonishing. Human bodies can be remarkably resilient. They can also be terribly fragile. The battle ends eventually. Perhaps your side holds the field. Perhaps it retreats. Victory itself feels less clean from ground level. Friends are missing. Equipment is lost. Everyone is exhausted. The dead must be dealt with. The injured need attention. The army still requires food. And tomorrow the enemy may still exist. This is exactly what Wessex discovers during the fighting of the early 870s. One victory does not solve the strategic problem. Ashdown is celebrated. Other battles are lost. The Scandinavian army remains capable of campaigning. Alfred eventually makes peace because continued fighting threatens to exhaust his kingdom. The pattern reveals a fundamental weakness. You can gather men, but can you keep enough men in the field continuously? If every able farmer stays away, who harvests? If forces disband? What happens when the enemy moves unexpectedly? The Scandinavian armies exploit mobility and timing. They seize fortified locations. They winter in strategic places. They force Anglo-Saxon rulers into repeated reactions. Alfred will eventually respond with reforms associated with fortified settlements, military rotation, and naval forces. But not yet. During the 870s, he is learning through failure. So are you. When you return home from service, perhaps weeks later, you look thinner. Your shoes are damaged. Your clothing needs repair. You smell impressively terrible. The people waiting for you do not care. Someone runs forward. A child grabs your clothing. Hands touch your shoulders as if confirming that you are genuinely there. Then come the questions. Who survived? What happened? Did you see the king? How many Danes were there? Were the stories true? You answer slowly. Some things you know, some you only heard, some you do not want to describe. Then you look around the household. While you were away, work continued. Grain was processed. Animals were tended. Clothing was repaired. Children were fed. Fuel was gathered. Your absence didn't pause anything. Someone else carried the weight, and very often, much of that weight fell upon women. The history of Alfred's wars tends to follow kings, armies, treaties, and battles. But the survival of Wessex also depends on people who never stand in a shield formation. You notice a woman near the hearth twisting thread between practiced fingers while listening to your story. She's been working since before you returned. Tomorrow she'll work again, and if you want to understand what keeps this household alive while men march away with spears, you need to follow her day. The thread turns steadily between her fingers. It looks effortless because she has done it thousands of times. That is one of the quiet tricks of skilled labour. You see the finished motion and miss the years required to make the motion look simple. Before the household is fully awake, work has already begun. Fire must be revived. Water may need carrying. Food must be prepared. Children need attention. Animals cannot be persuaded that everyone deserves a quiet morning after yesterday's military excitement. If you are a woman in Alfred's Wessex, your experience depends enormously on status. There is no single Anglo-Saxon woman's life. An enslaved agricultural worker, a free farmer's wife, an aristocratic landholder, a nun, and Queen Ealhswith inhabit radically different worlds. Yet all live within a society where household production is fundamental. Textiles offer perhaps the clearest example. You have already watched wool becoming thread, but now you follow the process more closely. The sheep must first provide fleece. The fleece then needs cleaning and preparation. Fibres must be sorted and arranged before spinning. Different techniques and tools can be used. An archaeological find such as spindle whorls reveal just how widespread spinning is. A spindle turns. Fibre becomes yarn. Slowly, very slowly. One garment can represent extraordinary quantities of labour. Modern experiments attempting to reproduce historical textiles have repeatedly demonstrated the scale of the task. Exact working times vary according to fibre quality, technique, skill, thread thickness, and desired cloth. But nobody completes an entire household wardrobe during a relaxing afternoon. Spinning can accompany other activities. You can talk while doing it, watch children, listen to news, walk short distances in some circumstances. The work enters the rhythm of life. Then comes weaving. A loom requires preparation before actual weaving begins. Warp threads must be arranged correctly. Tension matters. Stakes can become expensive. Cloth emerges gradually. If colour is desired, dyes require another body of knowledge. Plants and other natural materials can produce yellows, reds, blues, browns, greens, and intermediate shades depending on mordants, processing, combinations, and local resources. Woad is associated with blue. Madder can produce reds. Other plants provide yellow tones. Obtaining a reliable colour is chemistry performed without calling it chemistry. A skilled dyer understands proportions, temperatures, timing, and materials through practice. Then the cloth becomes clothing. Cutting must minimize waste. There is no reason to throw away valuable fabric. Small pieces can be reused. Garments are repaired. Edges are reinforced. Patches appear. A cloak may remain useful for years. This makes textile production economic power. Women strongly associated with this work are not simply decorating domestic space. They are producing essential goods. And they do much more. Food preparation occupies enormous time. Remember your breakfast. Someone processed the ingredients. Grain needs grinding. Bread requires dough. Ale requires brewing. Milk becomes cheese or butter. Meat must be prepared and preserved. Vegetables need tending and cooking. Herbs must be gathered or cultivated. Water must be fetched. Fuel must be supplied. The household consumes labour as constantly as the hearth consumes wood. Brewing deserves particular attention. Ale is an everyday product and can be made within households, often with women playing central roles in production. Malted grain must be prepared, water heated, vessels cleaned, fermentation managed. A failed batch wastes resources. A good batch provides drink, calories, and something worth sharing. You learn by watching older people. Recipes may not be written. Measurements can be embodied. You know what the mixture should look like, how it should smell, how warm something feels when it has gone wrong. This is expertise preserved through repetition rather than manuscripts. Women also work outdoors. They tend animals, milk cows, help during harvest, work gardens, gather fuel and plants, carry goods, participate in trade. The exact division of agricultural tasks varies according to household need, season, status, and local custom. The convenient picture in which men perform all farming while women remain permanently beside the hearth does not survive contact with practical reality. Harvest does not care who is tired. If grain needs gathering before rain arrives, available hands gather it. Pregnancy and childbirth add another layer of danger and labour. You live without modern obstetric medicine. Women possess accumulated knowledge surrounding birth, and other women likely provide much of the immediate assistance. Although written evidence for everyday childbirth practice in Alfred's England is frustratingly limited, this is a recurring problem. Male clerics produced most surviving texts. They were not especially interested in documenting exactly how an ordinary farming woman managed labour pains at 3 a.m. Archaeology helps, so do law codes. Wills and charters provide glimpses of women controlling property and participating in elite transactions. But much disappears. You therefore have to distinguish carefully between silence and absence. A woman's activity can be economically central without generating a document. Free women possess legal standing, although not equality in a modern sense. Marriage involves property and family arrangements. Anglo-Saxon laws preserve concern with payments connected to marriage. sexual conduct, inheritance, and protection. The precise meaning of some legal provisions is debated, and surviving law codes often tell us what authorities wanted to regulate rather than providing a perfect photograph of daily behaviour. Still, they reveal something important. Women are not legally invisible. A free woman may possess property. Elite women can control estates. Widows may have significant independence. Some women make wills disposing of land, livestock, jewellery, enslaved people, and other property. Later surviving Anglo-Saxon wills provide especially vivid examples, although many belong after Alfred's lifetime and should not simply be projected backward unchanged. Even so, the broader tradition of female property holding is real. Status again changes everything. An aristocratic woman may oversee a substantial household containing servants and enslaved workers. She may manage stores, coordinate production, arrange hospitality, and act during her husband's absence. Her marriage can connect political families. Her children may become kings, abbesses, or powerful nobles. Queen Ealhswith herself comes from important Mercian ancestry. Her father, Ethelred Musel, is associated with the Gaini, a Mercian group or district whose exact nature scholars continue to discuss. Her mother, Eadburh, also comes from Mercian royal connections according to Asa. The marriage therefore links Alfred to Mercian elites. Yet Ealhswith is not crowned queen in the way a modern viewer might expect. West Saxon attitudes toward queenship during this period are complicated, reportedly influenced by memories of an earlier queen whose conduct had damaged the title's reputation. Asa tells a story explaining this custom. Though once again you should remember that explanatory stories can simplify messy political traditions. Ealhswith nonetheless matters. She bears children, maintains royal household roles, survives Alfred, later establishes or supports religious foundations. Her daughter Ethelflaed will become one of the most formidable political figures of the age, ruling Mercia with extraordinary authority. But none of that future is visible yet. For now, perhaps you imagine Ealhswith waiting for news from another campaign just as women in humbler households do. The difference is scale. When Alfred leaves, the fate of a kingdom follows him. When your husband, brother, or son leaves, the fate of your household feels large enough. If he doesn't return, your responsibilities change immediately. Can you maintain the holding? Who inherits? Do relatives intervene? Does a lord provide support? Will you remarry? A widow's position depends on resources and status. But widowhood can sometimes provide greater legal and economic independence than marriage, particularly for women with property. For poor women, however, independence without resources can simply mean vulnerability. Then there are enslaved women. Their work may resemble that of free women in outward form. They spin, cook, clean, work fields, tend animals, care for children, but their legal condition changes everything. They can be bought and sold. Their family relationships may be vulnerable to the decisions of owners. Sexual exploitation is an obvious danger in societies where one person possesses legal power over another, even when surviving sources speak indirectly. PG-rated narration does not require details to understand the imbalance. Freedom determines whether your labour belongs fundamentally to your household or to someone who owns your service. You look again at the woman spinning beside the hearth. Perhaps she is free. Perhaps the household belongs partly to her family. Perhaps the keys hanging from a belt or stored nearby symbolize responsibility for valuable stores, though we should be cautious about assigning one universal meaning to objects across all contexts. She knows how much grain remains, which garment needs a repair, which child has a cough, which cow may soon calve, who borrowed a vessel, whether the ale is ready, when more fuel is needed. This is administration, just not the kind chroniclers usually record. Later, historians can count battles because someone wrote them down. Nobody records the morning when she notices grain becoming damp and moves it before the entire store spoils. Yet that decision may save a household. History survives through unequal evidence. Kings leave charters. Warriors leave chronicles. Churchmen leave manuscripts. Ordinary women often leave spindle whorls, loom weights, bones shaped by labour, jewellery, graves, household archaeology, and occasional appearances in legal texts. From those fragments, you rebuild a life. The thread continues turning. Outside voices rise. A disagreement has begun. Perhaps an animal crossed a boundary. Perhaps someone owes compensation. The woman beside you barely looks up. She has heard disputes before. Everyone has. Because a household can survive enormous amounts of work only if rules exist for what happens when neighbours, relatives, strangers, or lords collide. Sooner or later, someone will demand judgment, and in Alfred's England, justice begins not with police tape or a courtroom clerk, but with reputation, oaths, compensation, witnesses, assemblies, and the dangerous memory of who wronged whom. The disagreement outside has gathered an audience, naturally. Few things attract attention in a small community faster than two neighbours insisting that the other one is obviously wrong. The problem itself may be painfully ordinary. An animal has damaged crops, a boundary has been crossed, a borrowed object has not been returned. Someone claims a payment was promised, someone else insists no such promise was ever made. Nobody has called the police. There are no police in the modern institutional sense. No uniformed officer arrives carrying a notebook. Order depends on a mixture of royal authority, local officials, assemblies, lords, kin groups, sworn testimony, customary expectations, and the willingness of communities to enforce judgments. Your society is legalistic in ways that can surprise modern people. Anglo-Saxon kings issue law codes. Alfred will eventually produce one of the most famous collections, combining his own provisions with material associated with earlier kings and a long biblical introduction. But royal law does not replace custom, nor does a written law code tell you exactly what happens in every village dispute. Much of practical justice is local. Assemblies matter. The 100 Court, familiar from later Anglo-Saxon England, has roots that scholars continue to investigate. While larger shire structures also develop over time, you should be cautious about importing the fully documented institutions of the 11th century unchanged into the 870s. Still, public gatherings for judgment and administration clearly form an important part of political life. If your dispute becomes serious enough, you may have to appear before men who know both parties. That last detail changes everything. You cannot easily reinvent yourself. Reputation walks into the assembly before you do. If everyone knows you as dependable, your words carry social weight. If you are famous for borrowing tools and developing mysterious amnesia, the audience may be less sympathetic. Oaths matter enormously. In the absence of forensic laboratories, security cameras, fingerprints, and written contracts for every small transaction, sworn testimony helps establish truth. An accused person may need oath helpers, sometimes described through later terminology as compurgators, who support the credibility of the oath. They are not necessarily witnesses to the event. Their role is connected to the standing and trustworthiness of the person swearing. This can feel strange to you, but imagine a society where character and kinship function partly as credit history. Your reputation becomes evidence. Witnesses also matter. Transactions involving land or valuable property benefit from being conducted publicly because memory is essential. People need to remember who agreed to what. A written charter can secure elite land transactions, but ordinary life still depends heavily on human testimony. Then there is compensation. You remember the Vergilde from the hierarchy of your settlement. Its purpose becomes clearer here. Violence threatens more than two individuals. If one man kills another, the victim's relatives may seek vengeance. Then the killer's relatives defend him. Another person dies. Then another. A feud can grow. Compensation offers a way to convert injury into a recognized debt. Payments for different injuries appear in early English law codes with extraordinary specificity. Earlier laws can assign compensation for damaged teeth, fingers, ears, and other body parts. The exact schedules vary by kingdom and period, and not every clause should be assumed to operate identically in Alfred's Wessex. Still, the principle survives. A body has legal value. Injury creates obligation. The amount may depend on status. This is not equality before the law. A nobleman's life carries a different compensation value from that of an ordinary freeman. An enslaved person occupies a different legal category again. Hierarchy follows you into justice. Yet compensation can restrain revenge. Suppose your relative is killed. Emotion tells you to retaliate. Law tells you there is a recognized settlement. Kinlord and community may pressure both sides toward agreement. Peace has economic value. Two households engaged in permanent vengeance are not particularly useful to a king trying to resist Scandinavian armies. Alfred has every reason to care about internal order. A kingdom facing external attack cannot afford endless private conflict. Royal authority therefore presents itself as a guardian of peace. Certain offences become violations not only against individuals but against the king's protection or public order. Breaking into particular spaces, attacking people under protection, stealing, treachery, and other acts can carry serious penalties. The concept of mund, protection associated with a person's authority and household, is important in earlier Anglo-Saxon law and continues to influence ideas about protected spaces and relationships. Your house is not simply timber, it has legal significance. So does the King's Hall. So does a church. Violation becomes more serious depending on whose peace has been broken. Theft is especially dangerous in a society where a small number of possessions can represent years of labour. Steal a cow and you have not merely removed an animal. You may have removed milk, breeding potential, manure, wealth, and part of a household's survival strategy. Communities therefore treat theft seriously. Tracking stolen livestock can involve neighbours and local authorities. Markets also create rules intended to make transactions visible, partly because secretly selling questionable cattle is suspicious in any century. Punishments can include fines, compensation, loss of property, corporal penalties, enslavement in some circumstances, or death for serious offences. The precise penalty depends on status, offence, law, and context. Prisons do not play the central role they do in modern criminal justice. Maintaining large numbers of prisoners requires buildings, guards, food, and administration. Your society generally prefers outcomes that compensate. Punish physically, exclude, enslave, or execute rather than paying indefinitely to keep offenders behind walls. There is another possibility. Ordeal. When ordinary proof fails, religiously framed tests can be used to seek divine judgment. More detailed evidence for formal ordeals comes especially from later Anglo-Saxon sources, but the practice belongs to the broader early medieval legal world. A person might undergo a test involving hot iron or water, with the result interpreted through ritual procedures. To modern eyes, this appears profoundly unreliable. To you, divine justice is not a metaphor. If God knows the truth, then asking God to reveal it can seem logical. The clergy may participate in the ritual. Prayer surrounds the process. The wound or outcome is examined according to prescribed expectations. Law and religion overlap again, yet most disputes probably do not become dramatic ordeals. Most are mundane. Debts, property, animals, marriage arrangements, inheritance, assault, insults, broken agreements. Exactly the sort of problems human beings continue creating after more than 1,000 years of legal development. The argument in your settlement is still going. One man points toward a damaged patch of ground. The other gestures toward a fence. There it is. The fence. Remember the repair from earlier? A boundary that fails can create a dispute immediately. Perhaps the animal escaped because the owner neglected the fence. Perhaps responsibility for maintaining that section belongs to someone else. Now memory becomes important. Who repaired it last? Who was supposed to? Someone older remembers an agreement. Another person disagrees. Several neighbours contribute information whether requested or not. Eventually a local figure with authority intervenes. Perhaps a reeve associated with an estate or royal administration. The term reeve covers different officials and responsibilities across Anglo-Saxon history. So again, there is no single job description, but such men can supervise property, collect dues, organise labour, enforce obligations, and represent higher authority locally. A lord may become involved if the dispute concerns his dependents or estate. A priest might help encourage settlement, can add pressure. The goal is not necessarily to discover an abstract philosophical truth. The goal is to restore workable peace. Someone agrees to compensation, perhaps grain, perhaps labour, perhaps another form of payment. Nobody looks entirely happy. This is often a sign that a compromise has succeeded, but law becomes far more dangerous when politics enters it. Oaths of loyalty matter. Betrayal of a lord can carry severe consequences. Kings depend on fidelity. A noble who abandons Alfred during a crisis is not merely changing employers. He may threaten the kingdom. Royal law increasingly emphasises treachery as an especially serious offence, and Alfred's reign will place unusual attention on oath-keeping. This makes sense in a world where political order is built from personal bonds. A modern government can continue functioning when two officials dislike each other. A 9th century king depends much more directly on whether powerful men actually appear when summoned. An oath therefore has military consequences, religious consequences, legal consequences, personal consequences. The Scandinavian wars complicate everything. What happens when a region changes hands? Which ruler's law applies? What if a local elite makes peace with the Danes? Is he a traitor or a survivor? The answer may depend on who writes the chronicle afterward. Mercian ruler Ceolwulf is a perfect example. West Saxon tradition belittles him as a Danish puppet, yet evidence suggests he may have exercised meaningful authority and cooperated with Alfred in some circumstances. Politics makes legal categories slippery. Ordinary people understand this instinctively. You obey the authority capable of reaching you. You maintain relationships. You avoid unnecessary enemies. You remember promises, and when possible, you settle disputes before they become feuds. The crowd finally begins to disperse. The damaged field remains damaged, but the argument has cooled. Someone mutters while walking away. Someone else looks smug enough to restart the entire dispute tomorrow. Peace, apparently, is a process. You turn toward the track beyond the settlement. Several people are preparing to travel. They carry goods. Perhaps there is a market ahead. Perhaps a larger estate centre. Perhaps a trading place where silver changes hands and objects arrive from distances most villagers will never travel. After a morning spent thinking about boundaries, law, and local quarrels, the road suddenly feels expansive, because Alfred's England is not isolated. Beyond these fields lies a network of rivers, roads, ports, workshops, markets, and sea routes connecting your smoky household to places you know mostly by name. You adjust your cloak and join the travellers. The settlement begins to shrink behind you. The track is muddy enough to demand attention. Each step lands carefully. Wheels have cut grooves into softer sections, and recent rain has collected in shallow pools. There is no smooth paved highway carrying you effortlessly toward the nearest market, yet calling your world disconnected would be a mistake. People travel constantly. Messengers ride between royal centres. Clergy move between churches and monasteries. Traders carry goods. Farmers visit markets. Nobles travel with households and retainers. Pilgrims journey towards sacred places. Armies, unfortunately, are also enthusiastic users of roads. Some routes are ancient. Roman roads still cross parts of Britain centuries after imperial government disappeared. Their condition varies enormously. Certain stretches remain useful, while others have deteriorated, been altered, or simply ceased to matter. You may walk along one without thinking much about the vanished empire that built it. To you, it is simply a road. Rivers can be even more useful. Moving bulky goods by water is often easier than dragging them across bad tracks. Boats carry people, food, timber, stone, livestock in suitable circumstances, and commercial goods. The coastline opens still wider connections. The sea is not a wall around England. It is a road. A dangerous, unpredictable, occasionally murderous road, certainly, but a road nonetheless. Across it lie Francia, Frisia, Scandinavia, Ireland, and trading networks reaching far beyond the places you personally know. Objects travel extraordinary distances. Silver offers one of the clearest examples. Much of the silver circulating in northern Europe ultimately connects to trade networks stretching eastward through Scandinavia and into the Islamic world. Large quantities of Islamic silver coins have been found in Scandinavian contexts, evidence of connections reaching across rivers and trade routes toward regions unimaginably distant from Wessex. You will probably never meet a merchant from Baghdad, yet silver shaped within that wider economic world can move through many hands before entering northern European exchange. The world is larger than your horizon. Eventually the track becomes busier. You are approaching a place where exchange occurs more regularly. Do not imagine a later medieval town with crowded stone streets, towering guild halls, and rows of permanent shops. Urban development in 9th century Wessex is still evolving. Some older trading settlements, often called wicks by modern scholars, have flourished from earlier centuries. Hamwick, associated with modern Southampton, is a major example, though its fortunes changed significantly during the 9th century. Other centres grow around royal estates, churches, fortified sites, and administrative functions. The network that will later become Alfred's famous system of burhs has not yet reached its mature form. Still, markets exist, and the moment you enter one, your senses notice. Voices, animals, wood smoke, leather, food, mud, metalworking, people calling to acquaintances, someone arguing about price with the confidence of a person who has clearly been arguing about prices for decades. Goods are laid out or exchanged according to local arrangements. Grain may be sold, livestock traded, textiles exchanged, pottery offered, iron tools attract attention, leather goods hang nearby, salt is valuable, honey and wax matter, fish can arrive preserved, imported goods appear more selectively and may signal status. A beautifully made object from overseas attracts eyes precisely because it is unusual. Glassware exists, fine metalwork exists, wine can be imported for elite or ecclesiastical consumption. Luxury textiles and exotic materials move through aristocratic and religious networks. But your ordinary market basket remains stubbornly practical. You need a tool, perhaps salt, maybe a replacement vessel, something useful. That does not mean people ignore beauty. Decorative metalwork from Anglo-Saxon England can be extraordinarily sophisticated. Craftspeople work with gold, silver, copper alloys, garnets, enamel-like materials, and intricate designs. Elite objects display animals, interlace, Christian imagery, geometric patterns, and complex craftsmanship. By Alfred's time, artistic styles have evolved from those of the earlier conversion period, but skilled metalworkers remain capable of remarkable work. Alfred himself will later commission or be associated with objects of exceptional quality. The famous Alfred jewel, created around his reign, bears an inscription identifying Alfred as having ordered it made. Its exact function is debated, though it is often interpreted as an estel, a pointer associated with reading. You do not see it today, but somewhere in your wider world, craftspeople possess the skills required to make something like it. Your attention returns to smaller metal. Coins. Alfred's England has a monetary economy. Although coin use is not equally intense everywhere or in every transaction, the silver penny is central. Coins carry royal authority as well as economic value. A king's name appears on money. Sometimes the minting place or moneyer can be identified depending on the coin type. The object is small enough to sit on your fingertip. Politically, it is enormous. A coin says that a ruler claims authority over standards of exchange. It travels farther than the king himself. Alfred's coinage changes through his reign, and numismatists use surviving examples to reconstruct political relationships, mint organization, economic activity, and even moments of crisis. Coins can reveal cooperation too. Some coinage associated with Alfred and Mercian ruler Ceolwulf suggests a more complicated political relationship than the dismissive West Saxon chronicle later implies. A tiny piece of silver can therefore argue with a chronicler. This is one reason historians love coins. Coins do not tell you everything, but they occasionally refuse to repeat official propaganda. You may not use coin for every purchase. Barter, obligations, renders, credit, and exchange in kind remain important. A neighbour can owe you grain rather than silver. A lord can receive food. Labour can settle an obligation. Economic life mixes monetary and non-monetary systems without finding the combination strange. Weights matter when precious metal is exchanged. In Scandinavian contexts especially, hack silver and weighed bullion become important. Though coin-based systems remain strong in Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the meeting of these economic habits becomes especially interesting wherever Scandinavian settlers and Anglo-Saxon communities interact. Nearby, a smith displays tools. You examine an axe head. It is not merely a chunk of iron. The metal began as ore. Smelting required a furnace, fuel, air control, and expertise. Bloomery iron emerged mixed with slag and needed further working. Smiths repeatedly heated and hammered material to create useful objects. Temperature is judged without a digital display. Colour helps. Experience helps. Sound helps. The smith knows when iron is ready. A poor decision can waste hours of work. Other crafts are equally specialised. Bone and antler become combs, pins, handles, gaming pieces, and fittings. Leatherworkers produce shoes and straps. Potters shape cooking and storage vessels. Woodworkers create almost everything else. Some production occurs within households. Other crafts become concentrated among specialists, especially at larger settlements and elite centres. Craft skill can travel, so can fashion. An object made in one region influences designs elsewhere. People imitate what they admire. Apparently trends existed before anyone invented social media. You move deeper into the gathering. Different accents reach you. Perhaps someone comes from farther west. Another trader has travelled from Mercian territory. A cleric may know Latin. A Scandinavian visitor might even be present depending on place and circumstances. This last possibility is worth remembering. War does not prevent all contact. Scandinavians are not only raiders. They trade, settle, negotiate, intermarry, adopt local practices, and eventually convert to Christianity in substantial numbers. The boundaries between communities become complicated. A man with a Scandinavian name may become a landholder in England. An English craftsman may sell goods to Scandinavian customers. A former enemy may become a neighbour. This process is already beginning in conquered regions during the 870s. The political geography of England is being transformed not simply by destruction, but by settlement. You purchase what you need, perhaps a little salt, perhaps a repaired iron object rather than a new one. Waste remains a luxury. Before leaving, you hear news. Markets are information exchanges as much as commercial ones. Someone has heard that warriors are moving again. Another person says Alfred has made arrangements with local leaders. A traveller describes conditions farther north. Stories about conquered lands circulate. You listen carefully but believe cautiously. Then the journey home begins. The goods you carry are modest. The information feels heavier. Clouds gather while you walk. The air has changed. A cooler wind moves through trees. You notice how early the light begins fading. The year is turning. Fields that recently demanded constant work are becoming quieter. Animals will soon need more shelter and stored fodder. Food supplies will be counted again. Fuel will become precious. Roads will worsen. Travel will become less comfortable. And the long darkness will press people back toward hearths. For armies, winter creates difficulties. But you have already learned the dangerous truth of this age. Scandinavian forces sometimes winter in England. Cold does not guarantee safety. You pull your cloak tighter. The market disappears behind you. Silver, traders, roads, and distant worlds fade from thought as the first drops of rain touch the ground. Ahead lies home, and beyond home lies the season every household must prepare for whether kings are winning or losing. Winter is coming to Wessex. The rain follows you home. By the time the familiar roofs appear through the grey afternoon, water has darkened your cloak and softened the ground beneath every step. Smoke hangs low above the settlement, pressed downward by damp air. You enter the house gratefully. Warmth does not reach you immediately. First comes smoke, then the smell of wet wool, then the small relief of standing near the hearth while water begins leaving your clothing as steam. Winter in Alfred's England does not need spectacular blizzards to become difficult. Cold rain can be enough. Mud can be enough. Weeks of dampness can be enough. England's climate in the 9th century cannot be reconstructed as precisely as a modern weather record. And conditions vary from year to year. You should be cautious about imagining every winter as a frozen catastrophe. Some are mild, some are harsh. Most are simply inconvenient in ways modern heating allows you to forget. Daylight shortens. That changes your life immediately. You possess no cheap electric lighting capable of turning midnight into afternoon. Once darkness falls, every artificial source of light costs something. Fire consumes fuel. Lamps require oil or fat. Candles require material and labor. So you use daylight carefully. Work begins when visibility allows. Outdoor tasks are compressed into shorter hours. Evening pushes people toward the hearth. The household becomes physically smaller. Summer spreads your life across fields, pasture, woodland, roads, and neighbouring settlements. Winter draws it inward. Now the preparations you made during warmer months reveal whether they were enough. You inspect the fuel. There is never as much as you would like. Firewood must be gathered, cut, transported, dried, and stored. Rights to woodland resources can be carefully controlled, particularly on estates where different people possess specific customary access. You cannot necessarily walk into any forest and take whatever you please. Woodland has owners. It has rights. It has value. Deadwood may be collected under particular arrangements. Trees can be coppiced or otherwise managed to produce renewable supplies of usable wood. Woodland also supports pigs, construction timber, tools, charcoal production, hunting, and gathered foods. Burning wood therefore means consuming an economic resource. Still, cold makes philosophy rather unimportant. You feed the hearth. The flame rises. Everyone moves slightly closer. Animals need winter planning too. Some livestock can remain outdoors under suitable conditions, but grazing declines and stored fodder becomes crucial. Hay gathered months earlier now turns into survival. You count animals differently at this time of year, which can be supported through winter, which should be slaughtered before fodder becomes scarce. Autumn slaughter is a practical strategy because keeping every animal alive would consume resources you do not possess. Meat from slaughtered livestock can be eaten fresh or preserved. Salt becomes precious again. Smoking and drying may help. Fat is valuable. Hides become material. Bones can become tools or other useful objects. Little is casually discarded. The household's winter diet begins narrowing. Fresh summer abundance disappears. Stored grain becomes central. Preserved foods matter. Cheese, dried peas or beans, salted or smoked products where available. Roots, greens, or other vegetables may continue according to storage and local cultivation. Food can feel repetitive. You may find yourself deeply excited by an onion. This is not because 9th century people possess unusually passionate relationships with onions. It is because February has a way of improving an onion's personality. The real anxiety lies in quantity. You remember the calculations made after harvest. Now they become physical. Each container grows emptier. Each loaf represents grain removed from storage. Every guest means another portion. Hospitality remains important, but generosity is easier after a good harvest. A poor household watches supplies carefully. Children are fed. Workers need strength. The elderly may require support. Someone becomes sick. Suddenly consumption and labour no longer balance as expected. Illness in winter is especially frightening. People spend more time close together indoors. Ventilation is imperfect. Smoke irritates lungs. Respiratory infections can spread through households. You do not know about viruses or bacteria, but you recognize patterns. One child coughs, then another. An older relative develops fever. You know enough to worry. Treatment blends practical care, inherited remedies, prayer, and whatever medical knowledge is accessible. Warmth, rest, herbal preparations, food if the patient can eat. Perhaps a priest is summoned if the illness becomes serious. Some recover, some do not. Infant and childhood mortality is high by modern standards, though assigning exact rates to Alfred's Wessex is difficult because evidence is incomplete. Adults face danger too: infection, accidents, childbirth, chronic illness, poor nutrition during hard years. A modern person dropped into your household would probably spend the first week enthusiastically requesting antibiotics and the second week realizing nobody understands the request. Yet you are not helpless. Traditional knowledge has accumulated over generations. People recognize useful plants. They know how to splint some injuries. They understand the importance of warmth, food, and rest. They observe symptoms. They nurse one another. The effectiveness varies, but care itself is real. So is emotional comfort. When darkness arrives early, people gather. This is when the social world of the hearth becomes most visible. Someone repairs clothing. Someone spins. A tool is sharpened. A child leans against an adult. Hands remain busy because light from the fire is too valuable to waste entirely. Then someone begins speaking. Stories flourish in darkness. You hear family histories, local memories, accounts of journeys, stories about saints, biblical narratives, old heroic traditions whose precise relationship to pre-Christian culture has become complicated by generations of Christian retelling. Perhaps there are riddles. Old English literature preserves a remarkable tradition of riddling, most famously in the later Exeter Book manuscript. Many surviving riddles are clever, playful, occasionally suggestive, and obsessed with ordinary objects. They invite listeners to look at the familiar world from a strange angle. What am I? Something speaks without a mouth. Something travels without feet. Something is held in the hand but has a life of its own. The answer becomes a small victory over darkness. Music may accompany gatherings too. Elite halls celebrate the figure of the scop, the poet or singer who performs stories and praise. How closely later literary depictions reflect everyday performance in Alfred's period remains uncertain. But oral storytelling and music clearly matter. Your own household does not require a professional poet. Someone knows a song. Someone always does. The melody fills the room softly. For a while, winter becomes almost pleasant. Almost. Then wind pushes against the wall. Everyone glances upward. The roof holds. Good. You remember how much labour stands between you and the weather. A damaged roof in summer is irritating. A damaged roof during a winter storm is an emergency. Maintenance therefore continues whenever conditions permit. Thatch is inspected. Walls are repaired. Drainage around buildings matters. Mud must be managed. Water finds weaknesses with extraordinary patience. Snow sometimes comes. When it does, the landscape changes overnight. Tracks disappear. Roofs turn pale. Sound becomes softer. Children may enjoy it. Adults immediately begin calculating inconvenience. Travel slows. Animals require attention. Fuel consumption increases. If snow remains, grazing becomes difficult. A beautiful landscape is perfectly capable of being an agricultural problem. Cold can also freeze water sources. Ice makes paths dangerous. Frost hardens soil. Yet severe cold can occasionally make muddy routes easier for a while, turning soft ground firm enough to cross. Every weather condition contains advantages and disadvantages. Even war responds to season. You might hope winter protects you from Scandinavian attack. Unfortunately, Scandinavian armies have learned to establish winter quarters. Their camps can become substantial bases. Repton in Mercia, used during the middle of the 870s, has produced archaeological evidence connected with a Scandinavian winter camp. Though interpretations of particular burials and features have generated extensive scholarly debate, other wintering sites reveal that these armies do not simply vanish when temperatures fall. They settle temporarily, repair equipment, gather supplies, plan, negotiate, and wait. That knowledge sits quietly behind your winter evenings. A traveller arriving unexpectedly still causes everyone to listen. A mounted messenger can still bring military orders. A lord can still demand provisions. There is no completely safe season, yet most nights remain peaceful. This is perhaps the strangest thing about living through a famous historical crisis. You experience far more silence than battle. You hear wind more often than swords. You spend more hours repairing clothing than fleeing warriors. The chronicler records armies because armies change kingdoms. Your memory records the night a child recovered from fever, the morning the cow survived a difficult birth, the week the roof leaked, the evening someone told a story so funny that an old relative laughed until tears appeared. These are the events from which an ordinary life is actually built. The fire settles lower. Outside, darkness covers the fields you worked earlier. The market road is invisible now. The church is only a shape beyond the settlement. Perhaps frost will come before morning. Perhaps rain. Inside, everyone gradually prepares to sleep. Blankets are arranged. The last tasks are completed. Someone checks the doorway. Someone looks once more at the fire. Tomorrow will require fuel, food, animals, work, and patience. But tonight you have shelter. The grain store is not empty. The roof holds. The people you love are close enough to hear breathing. And somewhere beyond the darkness, Alfred's kingdom still survives. For now that is enough. The household grows quiet. And as the last conversations fade, you begin to understand what survival in this troubled decade really means. Not victory in one great battle. Not a king's name written in a chronicle. It is reaching one ordinary night after another. The fire has collapsed into a red bed of embers. Nobody rushes to revive it. For now, the household needs only enough warmth to carry everyone through the first part of the night. Later, perhaps someone will wake and feed it. Perhaps the embers will survive until morning and be coaxed back into flame. Starting a new fire is possible. Preserving the old one is easier. You settle beneath wool, listening as the house slowly changes character. During daylight, it is a workplace. Now it becomes a shelter. The tools along the walls disappear into shadow. Bowls and vessels become vague shapes. A spindle lies still after hours of turning. Damp shoes rest where they may dry. Someone coughs. A child whispers something and receives a sleepy answer. Then quiet returns. Outside, Wessex lies beneath the same darkness. There are no great pools of electric light separating one settlement from another. Once the last hearths and lamps fade, darkness becomes almost complete. The sky therefore feels enormous. On a clear night, stars spread overhead with an intensity unfamiliar to many modern eyes. The Milky Way crosses the darkness. Familiar constellations turn with the seasons. You know the sky differently from a modern astronomer. It helps mark time. It accompanies travel. It carries stories. And above all, it reminds you how small the pool of firelight around a human household really is. Somewhere beneath that same sky is Alfred. Perhaps he sleeps at a royal estate tonight. Perhaps messengers are arriving. Perhaps he's discussing tribute, military obligations, or another report about Scandinavian movements. Perhaps his mysterious illness is troubling him again. The king's bedding is better than yours. His worries probably are not. He cannot know what is coming. Neither can you. That is important because the later story is so famous that it tends to pull the 870s toward events that have not happened yet. The crisis at Chippenham has not yet transformed Alfred's fortunes. His retreat into the marshes has not yet become legend. The decisive confrontation with Guthrum has not yet occurred. The settlement associated with the peace after Alfred's great recovery lies ahead. So do the fortified burhs, the reorganized military system, the educational reforms, translations, legal program, and political developments that later generations will associate with Alfred's mature kingship. Tonight, none of those achievements is guaranteed. You are living before the legend knows its ending. The Scandinavian threat remains formidable. Northumbria has been transformed. East Anglia has fallen under Scandinavian domination. Mercia has suffered political collapse and partition. Scandinavian settlement is beginning to reshape enormous areas of England. Wessex survives, but survival can look temporary. That uncertainty reaches everyone differently. For a nobleman, it means deciding whether Alfred can still protect his interests. For a priest, it may mean wondering whether a religious community is safe. For a merchant, it changes roads and markets. For a farmer, it means wondering whether armed men will take livestock. For an enslaved person, war may exchange one master for another or create a terrifying possibility of being carried far away. For a mother, politics can become a son summoned to fight. The grand events of your age enter ordinary life through doors like yours, and yet, as you lie awake, you're not thinking continuously about politics. Your mind wanders toward tomorrow. There is wood to gather. An animal requires attention. Someone promised to repair a tool. Grain needs grinding. Perhaps you will visit a neighbour. Perhaps the priest expects something. Perhaps that ridiculous pig will escape again. Almost certainly the pig believes this is a reasonable objective. The normality matters. Kingdoms do not survive merely because rulers make clever decisions. They survive because ordinary production continues beneath those decisions. Fields are planted, bread is baked, children are raised, clothing is woven, animals reproduce, roads remain usable, tools are repaired. Disputes are settled often enough that communities do not tear themselves apart. Food moves toward armies. Information moves toward rulers. Oaths hold often enough. Most people continue doing what yesterday required. Alfred's eventual success will depend on this foundation. A king cannot build fortifications without labour. He cannot maintain troops without food. He cannot circulate coins without silver and skilled moneyers. He cannot educate clergy without scribes, teachers, books, and institutions. He cannot issue laws into an empty landscape. The famous king stands on millions of ordinary actions that no chronicler bothers to mention. That is why your day has mattered. The smoke in your house mattered. The bowl of grain mattered. The fence mattered. The woman spinning beside the hearth mattered. The argument about damaged crops mattered. Even the market journey mattered. Together, these ordinary things form the kingdom that Alfred is trying to preserve, and the kingdom itself is changing. The warfare of this century is forcing people to reconsider what political survival means. Older rivalries between Anglo-Saxon kingdoms do not disappear overnight, but Scandinavian conquest alters the balance dramatically. Wessex will eventually become the stronger surviving English kingdom. Alfred's descendants will expand their authority into territories controlled by Scandinavian rulers. His daughter Ethelfled and son Edward will play crucial roles. Later rulers will push farther. Eventually, something closer to a unified Kingdom of England emerges. But you should resist making that outcome inevitable. History contains roads not taken. Had Alfred been killed in battle, the future changes. Had powerful nobles abandoned him, it changes. Had Scandinavian leaders coordinated differently, perhaps it changes again. Had disease removed a key ruler at the wrong moment, entire political arrangements might have shifted. The England you know is not waiting patiently to be created. People improvise it, slowly, often accidentally, and while rulers improvise kingdoms, ordinary people improvise survival. You adjust the blanket. The wool scratches slightly against your skin. That small discomfort returns you to the body. Your life is physical in ways modern existence often hides. You feel temperature directly. Daylight governs your schedule. Hunger tells you when stores are failing. A damaged shoe alters how far you can comfortably walk. Rain determines work. An injured hand threatens income and food. The health of a cow can matter to an entire family. Everything is close. Food is close to soil. Clothing is close to sheep. Heat is close to woodland. Law is close to reputation. Politics is close to military service. Death is close to illness. And memory is close to spoken words. Perhaps that closeness makes your world harsher. It may also make certain relationships more visible. You know who produced your food because you helped produce it. You know who made your clothing. You know who repaired your knife. You know the people buried near the church. You know the hands that built the house around you. Nothing feels entirely anonymous. Even your landscape is crowded with memory. A particular tree marks a familiar route. A stream carries childhood associations. A field belonged to someone's father. A mound has an old story attached to it. A church holds generations of worship. People exist inside places, and places exist inside stories. That is partly why invasion feels so threatening. To lose land is not simply to lose economic property. It is to lose a map of yourself. Scandinavian settlers understand attachment to land too. Many do not remain permanently mobile warriors. They take farms, establish households, raise families, give names to places, cultivate soil, trade with neighbours. Within generations, the descendants of invaders and the descendants of those they fought will inhabit increasingly intertwined societies. Language absorbs Scandinavian influence. Law changes. Settlement patterns shift. Names survive. The Viking Age is therefore not merely a story of attack. It is a story of transformation. Your own century cannot yet see how deep that transformation will become. You simply know that strangers have arrived and some are staying. A faint wind moves against the wall. The sound resembles someone brushing a hand slowly across the timber. You listen. Nothing follows. No rider. No alarm. No distant shouting. Just winter. The person beside you is asleep. Another breathes deeply across the room. The animals are quiet. For once. Even the dog has decided there is nothing urgent to announce. You think about Alfred again. Later generations will remember him through extraordinary claims. Defender of Wessex. Patron of learning. Lawgiver. Military reformer. The only English king traditionally called the Great. But if you could meet him tonight, perhaps what would surprise you most is how uncertain he seems. He is not a statue. He is a young king in a dangerous decade. He makes compromises. He loses battles. He becomes ill. He worries. He depends on other people. That makes his later achievement more interesting, not less. Greatness becomes easier to admire when it stops looking inevitable. And perhaps the same is true of the ordinary people around you. They are not passive scenery beneath Alfred's story. They are the reason there is a story to preserve. They endure harvest failures, long winters, childhood illnesses, hard labour, social inequality, war, uncertainty. They still make bread, still tell jokes, still decorate objects, still sing, still marry, still argue over fences, still pray, still hope their children will inherit something worth keeping. The embers pulse softly, red, then darker, red again. You allow your eyes to close. The kingdom can wait until morning now. The fields beyond the wall are quiet beneath the cold night. The muddy tracks empty, the church silent, and the distant roads temporarily free of messengers and marching feet. Somewhere, a king sleeps without knowing that centuries of memory will gather round his name, while here, in this small timber house, your own world has narrowed to warmth, wool, breathing, and the faint glow of the hearth. Nothing more is required from you tonight. The grain is stored. The animals are sheltered. The doorway is closed. Tomorrow may bring work, rain, rumours, laughter, or worry, but tomorrow has not arrived. For now, Wessex survives one more night. The wind moves softly through the darkness. The final ember dims, and you drift away with it, slowly and peacefully, while Alfred's England sleeps beneath the stars.